the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, members present this evening are myself, Mayor Marl, Council members Gearbaugh, Seibel Koenig, Rhodes, Roth, Tahar, and Dillon. From City staff, City Manager Campbell will be absent this evening, but we have Clerk Royal here this evening, as well as Police Chief Rennick and City Superintendent Engineer Rubel. At this time, the Chair would seek a motion to approve the agenda as amended. There is an amended agenda in front of you this evening, which includes, and the clerk can correct me if I'm wrong, includes one additional thing on the consent agenda, which would be the appointment of Sonia Smith to the Parks Commission for a term expiring 12/31/16. And in addition to that, there is a presentation from the chair of the Celtic Festival Executive Committee that will follow the presentation from URS about the US 12 reconstruction project. So I just want to make note of those two changes. Are there any additions to the agenda this evening? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So move.
Moved by Councilmember Roth. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman Seibel Koenig. All those in favor of approving the agenda as amended signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. There are no absences this evening, so we will dispense with that. So first up this evening is my charter-sanctioned mid-year State of the City address. Good evening, City Council, City Clerk Royal, distinguished guests, and my fellow citizens. I'm glad to be able to provide a mid-year State of the City address, and of course, it's an honor to serve as your mayor. I have said many times throughout the years that Saline is a special and unique place, and those of us who are fortunate to call this community home are blessed in many ways. With all the opportunities this community affords, the opportunities this community affords comes with great responsibility to ensure that Saline continues to have a bright and prosperous future. Moments from now, we will hear a presentation about the 2015 Celtic Festival, which also happens to be its 20th year. It's an exciting event with much to offer the people who have enjoyed it for many decades. But this year, we also have a number of new additions. There are a great many people who have worked tirelessly to make this event a success, and it's never too late to get involved. If you are interested in volunteering, I hope you will, but more importantly, I hope to see everyone there this coming weekend, July 10th and 11th. Of course, as many of you know, we are a city, and we as a council are very proud of the work we've done to stabilize and improve the city's financial position. We are intensely proud of the city's improved bond rating, the work we've done to advance, the work we did to advance adopting of a fund balance policy, and our recent 2015-2016 budget. As I've said in the past, budgets are a reflection of our priorities and values, and staff and council have been very thoughtful and thorough in the way we have considered our budgets. In particular, I'm pleased with this current budget that includes funds for new personnel at the police department and a new part-time code enforcement officer, as well as funding to support Rec on the Go. This budget also plans for anticipated retirements, which is approach indicative of forward-looking organizations. I'm also pleased that there is broad consensus on council to continue to consider pension and health care liability. In fact, next month we will be discussing and hopefully work towards adopting a new policy outlining our approach for employees interested in purchasing years of credit towards their pension. The city continues to work hard to leverage new economic development opportunities and encourage investment in the Saline community. Later this month, we will discuss a proposal by a well-regarded developer to acquire and develop our Monroe Street property, and we have some other interesting proposals on some of the other city-listed sites. I know we are all eager to work with potential developers and carefully consider their proposals. I've talked in the past about our LDFA TIFA task force, and I want to thank the members for their work. Later this month, we will consider their changes to the development plans for our industrial parks, as well as various commercial areas. I think they made some common sense, prudent recommendations, and their recommendations appropriately reflect new trends and forward-looking priorities. On a similar note, I have communicated with staff, legal counsel, and the chair of our Code and Ordinance Review Task Force, to call upon the group to reconvene in the coming months to investigate the possibility of changing some land use and zoning requirements in our industrial parks. I believe we need more flexibility and a more contemporary approach. There may be some value in thinking about these spaces as innovation parks instead of limiting them to exclusively industrial. Many other communities in southeastern Michigan and across our region have found ways to look at existing properties in new ways by looking creatively and strategically at the way our zoning ordinances work. Saline can better encourage and cultivate this type of investment, and it's what we want to see in a 21st century economy. The City of Saline will continue to hold citywide events targeting large businesses as well as small businesses and entrepreneurs. In fact, we will have one such event later this summer and another in the fall. The city will continue to invite existing businesses so that we can better understand their needs and connect them with resources that may be helpful. But we will also begin to be more aggressive in reaching out to developers and business leaders who may have an interest in operating in the Saline community. Make no mistake about it, our approach of working proactively with the private sector to help to create jobs and encourage investment in the Saline community will continue, and it will continue to be one of our primary areas of focus moving forward. In just a few days, a major infrastructure project will commence on North Harris Street. Area property owners have already been notified, but I encourage all residents to please be patient and to plan accordingly. The infrastructure project that consumes most of our time and energy to date is the 2016 Michigan Avenue Makeover. The planning for this project continues to go well, and candidly, the city was elated to receive more TAP grant funding than we initially requested or anticipated. We remind our citizens and business owners that the project will not only include the reconstruction of US 12, but the modernization of our streetscape and improved safety features along the length of the project, which will stretch from Maple Road to just east of the dam. The city continues to partner with Saline Main Street and other stakeholders to leverage new opportunities in our downtown, but also to strategically manage the resources we currently have. One particular item of note on tonight's agenda is Merchant Park. I think we have a responsible and conservative approach to improve the viability of this space, and also make it safer. While our downtown is historic, and it's what makes Saline unique, we have other important areas of commerce located throughout our community. With an understanding that we need strong and stable businesses and areas of commerce on our western border, the city will be organizing an event later this year and inviting the business and property owners along with other stakeholders to develop more cohesion and strategy for that area in our community. City staff, Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes, and I have already met about this initiative, and I believe that there is great potential there. Another important item on tonight's agenda is a contract to begin a citywide initiative to improve sidewalks and walkability. What is being proposed tonight will resolve approximately 90% of the defects in our city's sidewalk inventory through the utilization of Metro funds, coming at no cost to taxpayers. As I've stated in the past, our efforts to improve public transportation and connectivity will continue. I hope that we are in a position to partner with AAATA, more commonly known as the RIDE, in the very near future. In the meantime, I encourage people to utilize People's Express. Since we've added a second bus, they are now more responsive and accommodating. The safety of our community, my friends, is of paramount importance, and we continue to be served well by the men and women of our police and fire departments. Our efforts related to combating substance abuse and addiction continue. Although the progress has been slower than I or many would have liked, the group is close to finalizing its strategic framework. Subsequent to that, some organizational changes will need to take place, but I encourage people who are passionate about the issue to consider becoming involved. Integral to our community's well-being is access to quality, convenient emergency services. In the past, I have stated my regret that the city is no longer served by a 24-hour emergency room. In that vein, later this fall, I will be organizing a meeting and inviting members of the healthcare community, along with other community stakeholders, to discuss how we can better collaborate to meet our community's healthcare needs moving forward. I believe that it's absolutely imperative that we lead on this issue. The city continues to engage and communicate robustly with the people we serve and the people we represent. Even in the last few minutes, I've talked about some of the many events and community-wide discussions the city will be organizing on various issues to engage with our residents. The city will continue to remain open to new ideas and do everything we can to encourage new involvement by our talented community members. Truly successful, vibrant cities are inclusive and welcoming, and they work hard to develop and cultivate a sense of community. Saline already has a strong sense of community, but we need to work hard to make our city an even better place. Over recent months, the city has worked to establish the Saline Area Sustainability Circle, bringing together neighboring municipalities and stakeholders to discuss time-sensitive, important issues, and of course, a plan for the future. I am particularly excited about the fact that we recently created a sesquicentennial task force to celebrate the community's 150th anniversary next year. Councilmember Roth and I serve on this group, along with a number of other community leaders representing key constituencies in our area. The group is looking to establish some subcommittees to help coordinate next year's celebrations. They include fundraising, youth activities, tours, promotions and marketing, signature event, and volunteers. If residents are interested in joining one of the subcommittees or helping in any way, please contact me or another member of the task force. Needless to say, our efforts and our recent successes would not have been possible without the dedicated staff members and without my colleagues on City Council. Again, I want to acknowledge the tremendous efforts made by Mayor Pro Tem David Rhodes, Councilwoman Janet Dillon, Councilmember Dean Gearbaugh, Jim Roth, and Councilwoman Seibel Koenig and Linda Tahar. I'm emphatic, and I know that Saline is headed in the right direction, and I continue to believe that our best days are ahead of us. Thank you, God bless you, and may God bless Saline. Moving on the agenda this evening, we have presentations. The first is from Mike DeVries from URS regarding Henry Street traffic plan for the US 12 reconstruction project. I have to apologize to Mike as well as my colleagues on the dais and the members of the public who are in the audience this evening. We are having some technical difficulties, so we will not have a PowerPoint for this presentation or our subsequent presentation on the 2015 Celtic Festival. Mike is going to go through his memorandum, which was provided to you. Of course, Lynn Kirby is also here from MDOT. We appreciate you being here, Lynn. At the conclusion of their presentations and remarks, I will open it up for questions. But what I am looking for this evening is consensus on the options that were enumerated in your packet this evening. Again, to reiterate a point that was made previously, it is staff's recommendation that we go with configuration A. But again, I'm going to turn it over to Mike at this point for his presentation and comments from Lynn. We'll entertain whatever questions you have. And then again, I am looking for a consensus from the dais this evening on how best we can move forward on this issue. So I'm sorry to belabor the point. Mike, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We met back on May 18 to go over the different traffic control construction staging options for Michigan Avenue, US 12, and we looked at options to construct the road part width where you maintain all traffic on the street. And then we also had an option where maybe you create a detour using Henry Street, which would allow the construction to be completed more quickly. And of course, the issue then is you have MDOT's trunk line traffic on Henry Street, which is it's an issue. So we put together a memo based on the discussions that we had on May 18, bringing up and trying to address some of the concerns that council had as well as members of the public who spoke there. We looked at 3 different options for what it might take to use Henry Street as a detour. Option number 1 maintains all westbound traffic along US 12 through town, through the construction zone, and we convert Henry Street as the detour route, but we keep it as a 2-way road. So 1 lane in each direction along Henry Street. However, because US 12 is detoured, they'll have an extremely large amount of traffic eastbound as opposed to the amount of traffic westbound. In order to make the detour flow a little bit better, temporary traffic signals would be erected at Ann Arbor Street and Henry, and as well as at Maple. We also would recommend in this option to take the one short segment of Monroe between US 12 and Henry, just that one short segment, make that a one-way southbound street. And that's going to be necessary to do because of the construction ongoing up at US 12 and Monroe. During construction, it's going to be very difficult for trucks and larger vehicles to turn onto the detour if they're going eastbound on US 12 to go south on Monroe and then to make a left turn to go east on Henry. And so that one-way southbound on Monroe is a part of all of the different configurations. So with configuration A, Henry Street can be striped a couple of different ways if you keep it as a two-way road. You can stripe it as like a three-lane pavement with a center turn lane and get rid of all parking along Henry. That's sort of what configuration B entails. Configuration A tries to keep it more as a two-lane road with a double yellow down the center. And so you could potentially have parking along parts of the north half of the road. Parking along the south half would be eliminated through the duration of construction. At the work session on May 18, there was some concern from council about traffic going down Monroe to turn east on Henry to go on the detour. And so it was brought up, well, maybe you could make the detour a one-way detour. Just convert Henry Street into an eastbound roadway. And so all construction traffic along westbound Michigan just goes right through the zone, and eastbound traffic goes on Henry, and Henry is just a one-way street. And so we looked at that. That's configuration C. The road is wide enough, of course, you could have more than just one lane, but in order to try to keep speeds down, in order to try to keep traffic more controlled, we would recommend that on the one-way option, this configuration C, that just one lane be provided. And so you'd probably end up with some striping along the road, some white edge lines to delineate the one single lane, and then you'd probably allow parking on each side of Henry Street, both the north half and the south half is certainly possible to do that. And then when you approach the traffic signals that would be erected temporarily at the three locations, you'd create a left turn pocket to allow left turns to be made. And then configuration B is sort of in the middle. Configuration B is an option where we don't maintain a one-way eastbound street on Henry through the duration. We only maintain the one-way eastbound Henry from Monroe to the next block over, which is that Mark Hanna Court? Yes. And so, actually, no, not even to there, to Lewis. To Lewis. And so that would allow, again, the trucks that are making the turn eastbound from US 12 onto Monroe, they could go down, follow southbound Monroe down to Henry, and then turn onto Henry without having any westbound traffic on Henry sort of maybe being kind of in the way in that intersection. And then the one-way detour on Henry would only be that one block, and then once you get to Lewis and the rest of the way, it would be a two-way type of a scenario similar to configuration A. So configuration A, two-way street. Configuration C, make Henry a one-way street. Configuration B is kind of in the middle. That's really sort of a brief synopsis of what it would be. I could go over more details pointing at my computer screen, but nobody would be able to see that. So I believe you guys have had the memo, so if there's, I guess we can just kind of open it up for questions at this point.
Sure. We would welcome that. Thank you, Mike. Questions? We'll start at the end of the dais with Ms. Seibel-Koenig.
I think I just have a couple right now. Eastbound Henry, are left turns permitted at Lewis Street if you are eastbound?
With any of the options, I don't anticipate we would eliminate turns anywhere.
So there's no signal there and there's no turn lane there in this drawing?
Right.
So that traffic would stop if someone wanted to turn left onto Lewis?
That's
If they
correct.
wanted to get back to Michigan Avenue?
That's correct.
Can they re-enter Michigan Avenue off of Lewis then?
Yes.
Okay. And,
Except for the part of time when the
Right.
US 12 Lewis intersection's under construction. There will be
Right. I guess my other comment is, I'm wondering about the safety of any side parking on Henry Street during this time. With the increased volume of traffic going through there, I'm concerned personally that parking next to all the trucks and everything going by just feels a little unsafe to me on either the north or the south side.
The configurations A and B, which are primarily the two-way configurations, we show disallowing all parking along the south half of the road where the heavy volumes are going to be, which is eastbound.
Right.
We thought it might be useful to allow some on-street parking along the westbound side of Henry because of potential needs maybe for deliveries for some of the businesses that are along
Oh, that
that are
would
along
be east of
Michigan.
Ann Arbor Street?
Yeah.
East of Ann Arbor.
So there's some, we thought it might be worthwhile to consider it. If it was westbound that was using the detour, then maybe we wouldn't want that because it would be hard for cars to get in and out of the parking. But because westbound will be allowed through the construction zone, unimpeded almost, we didn't anticipate the westbound flow to be significantly higher, such that it would make parking more difficult.
Oh, okay.
So it's trying to strike that balance,
Yeah.
you know, of providing mobility and safety, but also providing some of that accessibility for parkers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cybo-Koenig. I'll just work my way, let's just work our way back, excuse me. Mr. Gearbaugh, do you have any questions, sir?
Not at this time.
No? Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes?
Question on the location for the temporary traffic signals. Seems to me, first of all, let me say I'm in support of configuration A, 2 lanes both ways on Henry Street. There's a fair number of vehicles which go west on Henry in order to turn left or go south on Monroe to leave town. And it seems to me they're going to have a very difficult time trying to make a left-hand turn with the one-way street coming in from Michigan Avenue. So I'd like to have you folks consider the possibility of a temporary signal at that intersection. And then the other item is a question that I have. Westbound traffic on Michigan Avenue going along the south side when it starts. And then eastbound traffic coming in and turning onto Monroe Street. How is that intersection going to be handled?
Well,
Very carefully.
so the first item you had mentioned about westbound, potentially a signal at Monroe and Henry.
Right.
Because of the potential difficulty for westbound and southbounders to make a left turn. We can look a little bit more in detail of sort of the volume profile of US 12. If I recall from when we examined the 3-lane option, or the 3-lane study that we did, eastbound US 12 is really busy in the morning peak hour. After the morning peak hour, it's not nearly as busy. And so I would anticipate that there would be possibility for gaps available to make a left turn outside of sort of the 7 to 9 a.m. hour. That might be difficult during that time. And so I'm not so sure we would want a signal there, but we can certainly, we can certainly look into that. And I need you to go over again your second question. What intersection are you concerned about? Michigan and?
Michigan Avenue and Monroe.
Okay.
So when construction starts, the south lane of Michigan Avenue will be westbound, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, okay. And then we've got eastbound traffic coming in that needs to turn onto Monroe Street. I'm just wondering, how is that going to work?
It's really tight in there. It'll be tight. Now remember, the options in general that we had presented on May 18 was part with construction or this detour option. Since the detour uses Monroe to get to Henry, the construction option really that you're left with for west of Monroe is part with construction. So it will be half and half construction west of Monroe, no matter what we do with the detour. So it's going to be, there'll be a lane of westbound traffic, sort of, it won't be along the south curb. It'll be on the south half of the road, but more towards the center line. So that there will be an eastbound lane approaching Monroe, that they're not going to run into each other, let's put it that way.
They'll be offset.
They'll be offset, yep.
And some of that westbound traffic on Michigan Avenue is going to want to turn left onto Monroe to get out of town, where there's a bunch of folks who live out that way.
Yeah.
And it just,
Yep.
I don't know, it's a nightmare.
Yep, and we're trying to look at options to provide like a left turn pocket in there to do that.
Okay.
If we're not able to do that, it's a possibility we have to split phase the signal, which means all westbound traffic flows and then eastbound traffic flows, and then the Monroe signal phase. Well, Monroe's not going to have a signal phase because it's going to be just a one-way southbound from Monroe down to
Right,
to
there won't
Henry.
be any-
It'll just be eastbound and, just eastbound and westbound flow through there.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks for considering those things, and particularly the temporary signal at Monroe and Henry. At certain times of the day would be very useful.
Anything further, Mayor Pro Tem?
That's it, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Hart?
Thank you. I also had the same concern as Mr. Rhodes about the Monroe-Henry intersection, so I'm glad to know you're still looking at all the variations. My other question was about, we have two, you presented in the memo and on the printouts, two variations for configuration A with respect to left turns. One was having essentially a left turn lane for most of the length of Henry Street with no parking on either side, so 3 lanes essentially.
Right.
And the other one was just left-hand turn pockets. So on the face of it, it seemed to me that having more left-hand turn lane availability would be more attractive for the people who live along that street as well as the businesses, because, and also for the purpose of not impeding traffic when someone's making
Right.
a left turn in a 2-lane situation. So can you talk about
Well,
pros and cons of the two variations as you see
Sure.
them?
I think it comes down to how important parking, on-street parking is. If it doesn't seem to be all that important to the city to have on-street parking along Henry, then I would recommend that you put a 3-lane section in there with the 2-way center turn lane for a long length. And the reason why I would like to do that is because that creates a buffer, kind of a buffer space between the westbound and the eastbound flows. And then you can create some narrower lanes that way too, in order to try to address the idea of potential speed on Henry Street. So personally, I like the idea of the narrower lanes and striping it as like a 3-lane roadway with a center turn lane in the middle. But I was trying to be sensitive to the fact that the council might also be worried about on-street parking along Henry.
Right. I guess for me, the question is the balance between eliminating some possible stops in the traffic flow because of people turning left without a left-hand turn lane if you just have 2 lanes versus the value of the on-street parking, so.
Yeah. You know, it's a good point you're making. I mean, it only takes one person to want to turn left, right, to stop
Right.
people
and
behind them.
And in some sections of Henry Street, the houses are fairly dense,
Yeah.
so that, it could be an issue.
Anything further?
That's it, thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Councilmember Roth, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. I think proposal A looks the best.
Okay, thank you, sir. Ms. Dillon?
I just have a quick question.
Please.
Do you have any concerns with having 2-way traffic on Henry that it's going to cause congestion westbound on both Michigan Avenue and Henry? That both of those roads are going to be perpetually backlogged?
Do I have concerns about it? That's a tricky question because congestion is going to come with the construction. And so, I mean, if it was, this is what you're left to live with for the duration of the city, then I would have concerns about it. But because of the fact that it's during a construction season, I'm less concerned about it. 1 lane on westbound through town on US 12, there'll be backups. There's no doubt about it. You know, when I kind of go back to some of the animations that I showed on the screen, I guess it was in the wintertime when we looked at what would take if Michigan Avenue were a 3-lane pavement. And you see some pretty large backups. I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. I think that's kind of unavoidable. And having 1 lane available for traffic eastbound on Henry is going to do the same kind of a thing. I think that backup, that congestion is primarily going to be felt mostly in the morning rush hour because eastbound is heavy in the morning and it's not all that heavy through the balance of the day. So I would think Henry is going to suffer a little bit during that morning time, and then it'll 9:30 it'll stay busy just because there's no traffic at all on Michigan eastbound, but it won't be, I don't think it would be unbearable.
Okay. My concern was for those residents, is it just going to be standing traffic in front of their homes, westbound traffic?
Will there be standing traffic? I think there's going to be some in the morning. Yep, I think there'll be standing traffic on Henry. I'm not sure there's a way you can get around it. And I'm not trying to sugarcoat it and say, oh, I'll be fine. I think there'll be traffic on Henry in the morning, particularly, yep.
And if it is two-way according to configuration A, is there a concern at Monroe and Henry? Is the westbound traffic going to need to stop back further so the trucks can swing?
We've laid out a turning template, and I don't have it with me, but that's typically where we would lay out stop bars is, what does a truck need to swing out to make the turn? And we'd base the location on that. Maybe it needs to get pushed back a little bit. I don't recall thinking that when I looked at that, but we would certainly take that into account.
Because my concern is if the truck can't turn, then you just have a bottleneck there where nobody's going to move. And if there's a backup going westbound, it's not like that first car can back up to let the truck.
Understood,
so
and that was kind of the genesis of configuration B.
Right.
Was to eliminate that westbound approach at the intersection.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anything further, Ms. Dillon?
No, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Gearbout, did you have something?
Yeah, just curious.
Please.
How will the light signals be timed? Is it the idea to get the most traffic through, or, because I'm concerned about turning it into a raceway to beat the lights?
Well, they'll be timed carefully with what's going on westbound, because those will have to be modified as well. So the cycle lengths will be the same in order to try to promote a little bit of flow along Ann Arbor and along Harris and things like that. We haven't gotten into that level of detail yet. My first thought was to try to, at least in the morning, provide enough time to minimize the stopped traffic on Henry. So a pretty significant amount of the green time would be given to Henry Street. And then enough time to get pedestrians across the street when the north-south flow is going.
Got it. Well, and then, depending on when this occurs, most of the time when school's out, hopefully that'll be able to adjust for that, but we'll see.
When school's out in the afternoon, eastbound is not nearly as busy. And of course, westbound will still be open through the construction zone. So we'll have an opportunity to play with those kind of timings. And this kind of stuff is really hard to know exactly what the volumes are going to be. And so this kind of stuff will get played with during construction in order to respond to actual conditions in the field rather than me trying to guess what they're going to be.
Right.
Yeah.
The only thing, I believe having configuration, I think it's B, where it's the one-way between Lewis and Monroe, because you can, the way you have this configured, go out South Lewis back onto Michigan Avenue and then come westbound. Because I think we're going to have issues with trucks and everything coming around that corner that's going to just back up traffic. So if I've got it right, it's configuration B, that point where you have where it's just one way between Lewis and Monroe Street.
Yeah.
I think because of the size of trucks and everything, just to get around that corner and the volume to have cars coming in and have another signal in there, we'll turn that into a bottleneck.
We hesitated creating a recommendation from us. We wanted, again, to get your thoughts on it. We preferred configuration B, having that one segment be one way, just to get the trucks off of Michigan and onto the detour on Henry unimpeded, so to speak. And then once you get them onto Henry, then you can control the traffic a little bit better once they're in line and just going down the road.
Anything further? Mr. Rhodes, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I was concerned about configuration B because that little section of Lewis Street is a pretty short block. And in the evening, people going west on Henry, then required to turn north on Lewis Street and then try to turn west again on Michigan Avenue, which is going to be only one lane. I don't know how they're going to get into that traffic stream unless somebody feels generous and stops and lets them in.
I would anticipate that there would be gaps created in traffic by the signal at Ann Arbor.
Well, there's not too
I mean,
many gaps in the traffic now when it's two lanes coming through because that's...
I understood there's not a lot of gaps, but
Yeah.
what you're describing, where not being able to make that left turn from Lewis, could potentially be said about any driveway that generates traffic along there too. And I think I would think there would be some gaps available in that signal along that's at Henry, or excuse me, that's at Ann Arbor. How many there are, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, it's busy in the afternoon, right?
The driveway is much different than all westbound traffic on Henry that hasn't found a home already, having to turn right onto Lewis and then go down. that's going to be really difficult. And I think that both of these concerns could be solved if there was a traffic signal
Agree.
down at Henry, West Henry and
At
Monroe.
Henry and Monroe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because if you had to move the stop bar back further, then you have visibility issues going off to the right. So people on Henry couldn't see traffic coming because they're sitting way back.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, understood.
Okay.
Understood.
Any other questions for URS? Let me, Lynn, since you came, you couldn't make any comment this evening? Lynn Kirby from MDOT, most of you will recognize the face and the name. We would welcome any thoughts you may have this evening.
Yes, we, as Mike said, we don't want to sugarcoat it. This construction project will have a major impact on the downtown as well as areas outside of the downtown. We appreciate your consideration of using Henry as a detour route. We think it'll make the construction go a little smoother, a little faster. While, there will be excess, additional traffic on Henry Street, even if you did have part with construction on 12, people would figure out that they could utilize Henry Street, and then it would be a little bit less, more of an uncontrolled situation than what we have right now. So, again, I want to thank you for your consideration of the options.
Thank you. We appreciate you being here this evening. Well, if there are no additional questions, to reiterate a point I made earlier, I am looking for consensus on which configuration council would like to move forward with. You have configuration A, B, and then of course C, which is found on page 2 of the memorandum from URS. Some of you have already articulated a preference. I know Mr. Rhodes has touched on this point on numerous occasions. It sounds like there's broad consensus for URS to investigate the feasibility of a traffic signal at Henry and Monroe Street. I know Mr. Rhodes feels that way. I would share that sentiment. I think I saw Mr. Gearbaugh nodding in the affirmative earlier. Oh, no, you do not want to investigate that. Okay, I apologize. Well, you were nodding, just
I
not in the affirmative.
was thinking he was proposing a signal at Lewis and Michigan Avenue
Okay.
that would allow people to turn into traffic.
You wanted to investigate, just so I'm clear on your intent, Mr. Rhodes, you wanted to investigate the feasibility of a traffic signal at Monroe and Henry, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Ms. Sabu-Koenig, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think that the traffic signal at Monroe and Henry is necessary unless we go with configuration B, and then that changes that. And I actually am leaning towards configuration B at this point.
Okay. Ms. Tahar?
Yes, the Henry Monroe intersection is a big concern, and I would agree. I would like either to see signal there or the use of option B.
Okay. Mr. Roth?
I'm the same as Ms. Terhar.
Okay. Ms. Dillon?
I'm also the same as Mr.
Okay,
Hall.
okay. So I can sort of gauge where consensus is going. Ms. Sabu-Koenig, you're more partial to option B, is that correct?
I am at this time.
Okay. Mr. Gearbaugh, you're also in favor of option B?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Rhodes was in favor of option A?
A with a light.
Yep, okay. Ms. Tahar?
Option A with a light would be my preference.
Okay. Mr. Roth?
A with a light.
Okay. Ms. Dillon?
B is my preference.
B is your preference. Okay. Which actually leaves us, well, I mean, I guess I can create consensus. Boy, I can really go either way, but I'm nominally more in favor of B than A. So, again, it appears as if B then would be the consensus. Is that correct? Gearbaugh's a B, Sabu-Koenig's a B, I would be a B, and Ms. Dillon would be a B? Okay. So, do you feel like you have the direction that you need? You do. Okay. So obviously, the investigating the feasibility of a light at Monroe and Henry is sort of a moot point at this juncture. Why don't you, if you wouldn't mind returning to the podium, talk to us a little bit about next steps. So now that you have consensus from council that our preference is for B, you're going to move forward and schedule a public hearing, a public engagement.
Yeah, that's the plan, and I don't know if Lynn would rather speak to this than me, but I believe we're going to set up a public meeting.
Yeah, once we receive the approval to move forward, we'll be setting up a public open house. We'll have displays to show how the traffic is going to be maintained, and some other things about the project. So that would be the next step. Probably have to get with some of the other folks at MDOT to schedule a meeting, and you, city staff, probably sometime in August or late July, something like that. And, you know, we'd also like to coordinate with the business owners and be through, if there's a Chamber of Commerce meeting or the Main Street group, to give them a presentation also. So those are our next steps.
Very good. Mr. Hart, did you have a comment or question?
Well, I wondered, did we also wish to discuss the the left-hand turn options on Henry Street? There were two variations presented within the presentation, or is that something that will be looked at further and decided elsewhere?
Mike, do you want to comment on that?
Well, like I said, it all depends on how important parking is. You know, we tried to have some segments be more like a two-lane road to provide parking along the north side, but if it's not a critically important issue, then I would prefer a three-lane pavement in order to create some buffer space between the heavy eastbound flow we anticipate and the westbound flow. Plus, you can stripe it as like a 10 or 9-foot lane to try to get the speeds down.
Well, there's no harm in seeing if we can develop consensus on that point this evening. I don't mean to keep picking on you, Ms. Cybo-Candy, but I know you verbalized an opinion earlier, or at least a concern about on-street parking. Do you have any thoughts that you'd like to express at this time?
I do sympathize with the fact that it is going to consume some of our parking if you were to eliminate on-street parking altogether. There's one real stretch of business zoning. You talked about deliveries, possibly using those the north side parking. And there's really only one big block in that stretch. Most of it is residential with driveways, and hopefully most of those residents could park off-street. You know, on-street parking is parallel parking, which in itself, if someone's actually going to really parallel park there, it's going to stop traffic for parking. So I'm not sure how to gauge whether to eliminate all of it. I don't want our business owners to feel like we're not being sympathetic for deliveries. I know the delivery issue is huge anyways. So I don't really have an answer.
Okay. I appreciate your comments. Mr. Gearbaugh?
Parking, I'm not so much concerned as I'm concerned about safety, which we've all been talking about. I mean, putting parking on the streets would slow down traffic, but the issue is, does it become a bottleneck if somebody starts to do something where they're passing around or whatever? The other option is, I don't know, we could potentially look, if we're worried about parking, putting a potential temporary lot, perhaps on the big lot, seeing something about, there's other options we can look at.
Sure.
I'm just more worried about flow and traffic on that street, and I don't know how many cars are usually using that street in the morning. Ms. Cybo-Koenig said that there's quite a few, so.
Henry Street's already very busy,
I don't know.
and many people park,
Right.
residents park, so.
There's a balance, so wherever
There
the
is.
balance works best, I say.
Mr. Rhodes?
I'm kind of twisting between myself. There is, I believe, a cutout area just east of Ann Arbor Street that would still stay parking, I'm assuming, regardless of what, because there's the curb bump out there.
Oh, yeah, that
So there's
spot,
still going to
right.
be some parking there. So the only parking that we're really talking about losing is mostly what's on the west side of Ann Arbor Street. So I guess in the interest of keeping traffic moving through, I guess I would support elimination of parking, on-street parking.
Mr. Hart?
Yeah, I would be in favor of left turn options for as much of the stretch as possible, both to keep traffic from getting bottlenecked when people are making left-hand turns, and also to narrow the lanes to slow down the traffic.
Mr. Roth?
I'm in favor of having a left turn lane and doing away with on-street parking, because it's be quite dangerous for high volume for anybody to get out of their car. You'd be waiting forever as far as to get your door open.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. Ms. Dillon?
I'm also in favor of foregoing parking for safety and possible left-hand turn lanes.
I would agree.
Yeah,
I
okay.
think in the spirit of safety and also with an understanding that we want things to move as expeditiously as possible.
You bet.
I think that's a wise approach.
So the graphics that we'll show at the public meeting will reflect that then.
Okay. Very good. Anything further from council?
No, I thought Terry had.
Mike, appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Lynn, thank you very much. Yep. Okay, moving on the agenda this evening, our second presentation this evening is the 2015 Saline Celtic Festival, and we have Don, the chair of the Celtic Festival Executive Committee with us here this evening. Don, we appreciate your time, but more importantly, we're excited about the 2015 festival, and I think you're going to tell us about a lot of the recurring events and amenities that people have enjoyed, but also some new and exciting features. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Don.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Council, for your wisdom of approving the 20th Annual Celtic Festival. I just left a meeting with 40 volunteers, enthusiastic volunteers, that are promoting this city and this festival. We are very, very proud. We intend to make the festival event this year better for people coming into this city and attending the festival. We want to make them happy coming in. We want to make them happy going out. We have added event staff so that everybody knows who to talk to. We have a 6-person golf cart that's going to allow people to be moved around the festival. There'll be several greeters at the front of the festival to welcome people into the festival. We're going to listen very, very carefully to any complaints and try to make this a happy event for everybody. We're adding laser shows this year. We're adding a zip line, a 300-foot zip line. It's 3 stories high. We increased our marketing this year on social media by 275%. We've hit over 30 news outlets promoting this festival. If you don't see our signs, then you're blind. On June 11th, we had a guerrilla marketing day where we hit over 100 businesses, where we talked to business owners, from gas stations to tailor shops, whoever who would listen to us. We put our signs out, and we had tremendous response from the people or the business owners. Again, seniors are free, military is free, children under 12 are free, children under 17 are $5. I think it's the best bargain you're going to get anywhere. We'll have 21 entertainment groups, music entertainment groups. There'll be 31 merchants. 21, I believe, are local merchants, farmers market type merchants, 10 food vendors, 4 pipe bands, 21 Michigan craft beers. We have 45 Highland athletes that are showing up to compete. We have 105 young ladies competing in the Scottish dance competition. We have the Ducky Race by the Rotary Club. We have 8 community not-for-profit groups that are going to present. We also have a downtown merchants booth this year to try to bring the downtown merchants in. The mayor's going to have a VIP tent, and on the day of the festival, we'll have 200 more volunteers at the event. The community pride is really strong, and you should be all very proud that you sponsor this event. This year, we did borrow money from you again. It's down $7,500 from last year, and we will pay it back. Probably the most important thing, or the 2 most important things, is we're 100% Michigan this year. We're in pure Michigan. All our entertainers, products, services, everything that we're doing is paid for by a Michigan-based business. And as of this point, there's only a 50% chance of rain on Saturday. So I'll entertain any questions.
Real quick, just so we're really clear on this, Don. The start time on Friday, when can people start to get into the park?
6 o'clock.
For pub night?
We'll have
6 o'clock.
Irish football and a laser show, 2 bands, and beer.
And then everyone at the dais here knows that there's a brunch, of course, that I'm hosting at 9:30, and then opening ceremonies at 11, and then most of the activities start subsequent to that, correct?
Correct. And we also have, on Thursday night, Main Street has been kind enough to let us bring our group in to perform at the Music in the Street Festival. And we'll have a demonstration of sheaf toss and a lot of good Irish music. So, I mean, I'm sure I'm missing things. There's so many things going on. It's almost overwhelming.
It's very exciting. Are there any questions for Don? Hopefully, we'll see you all this Friday and Saturday
come on
at the
down.
2015 Celts Festival.
One of our greeters is sitting right over there.
Very good.
By the name of Jim Roth. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, moving on the agenda this evening, we've come to citizen comments on agenda items. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time and make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested, but not required to state his or her name and address for the record.
Well, I don't envy you next year for the U.S. Highway, but what I was wondering, this is going to be a big impact, Mary Hess, I'm sorry, on our police department. And since it's a U.S. highway, can we, or the city, ask for additional help as far as in policing? Because if it was a local street, we could close it and we could have it all under our control. Because it's U.S. highway, they say this is the way it's going to be. And I was wondering if you possibly, if you can accept rejection, you can ask for some help as far as for our police department. I'm here to talk about the Merchants Park with my time left. And I have spent about $23 in pictures of our other parking lots and concerns I have. The mayor, of course, I appreciate you talking about safety being first and foremost. There are some broken sidewalks in our parking lots. There are weeds that I don't know who's supposed to take care of. And what I'm hoping with this Merchant Park proposal is that it be held off until after we get our U.S. highway. There is time. There's a planning time, there's a wish time, there's real time, and then there's a government time. And I remember when Blanchard was governor and he was going to put a 4-lane highway on US 12. If the weather get bad or whatever, there are so many things that could go wrong with this proposal. I also noticed that you have, or it has on the plan, approximately $7,000 for landscaping, and I think $5,000 for irrigation. And one of those in the parking lot behind the old Methodist church, when I was on council, we put a fortune into landscaping. But the thing is, the salt went on the parking lot removed the snow onto the landscaping, and there's nothing. And there's irrigation there for the nothing. Now, to me, this is not something that is going to improve this parking lot. This is window dressing, which I've used the word quite a bit. I think safety is very important. There is one area behind the old Methodist church where there's a handicapped parking place. And the sidewalk is absolutely crumbled, and you can't even get a walker through there. Our parking lot where we have our wonderful farmers market, that parking lot is falling apart. And I'm hoping that you can tell the public where the plan is for this. That's my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hess. Are there other citizen comments on agenda items?
Hello, my name is Riley Hollenbaugh, the Executive Director of the Saline Main Street Program. I'm here to talk about the letter addressed to City Council on downtown parking. And attached to that letter is the survey results that were sent to 85 downtown business owners with 37 respondents based off that. Based from that information and information received from the 4 attendees to the MDA conference, Saline Main Street recommends that the enforcement continues in downtown with the parking situation. Beyond this is to look at long-term and short-term solutions. Such solutions actually were each business owner would receive cards to customers that are going to stay longer than 4 hours. Cards will be placed in the windshield that they do not receive a parking ticket. Another recommendation was the first ticket issued would be a warning with a map that shows the location of parking lots in the downtown area, and fees would increase with each repeated offense. These are short-term solutions that were brought up by different communities. A lot of these communities, parking enforcement is done by the DDAs, not directly the police department. So, to think about. Do you have any questions based on the survey results that you've received?
I think we're good.
Okay,
We'll
great.
We'll welcome any additional thoughts that you have, Riley, when we get to that particular item on the agenda this evening.
Oh, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any additional citizen comments on agenda items? No? Then we'll move on to the consent agenda. The following consent agenda will normally be adopted without discussion. However, at the request of any citizen or council member, any item may be removed from the consent agenda for council discussion.
Move to approve as submitted.
Thank you, Mr. Har. Is there a second?
Second?
Seconded by Councilwoman Dillon. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda as submitted signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Just, Mrs. Bredernetz and Mrs. Hess, your item has been approved, so you're welcome to stay with us if you'd like, but if you'd like to excuse yourself, that would be fine too. Okay, thank you, ladies. Our first action item this evening under new business is item 15-128. This is simple recycling agreement. This is a follow-up from a presentation that was made at the last council meeting. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the July 1st, 2015 memo from City Manager Campbell and to approve or not to approve the simple recycling agreement and authorize the mayor and clerk to execute the agreement.
Move to acknowledge and approve.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes. Is there a second?
Second?
Seconded by Councilwoman Tahar. I'll get you on the next one, Councilwoman Dillon. Of course, Mr. Campbell isn't here this evening. Mr. Rubel, are you able to speak to this at all?
I did have a brief discussion with Mr. Scott Brady here, who presented the program to the City Council at a prior meeting. And both he and Mr. Campbell noted that the questions that came up and the concerns that came up were addressed through the city attorney and the draft agreement. And so the draft agreement as proposed should respond to your comments and concerns on a few items there. And I suspect if there's any questions, Mr. Scott Brady would be able to answer those.
Okay. Scott, first of all, we appreciate you being here this evening. If you'd like to make comment, we would welcome that at this time. Obviously, you did a thorough job a couple weeks ago, so you good? All right. Well, we appreciate you being here. Are there any questions for the applicant or for city staff? Mr. Gearbaugh, please.
Is there any concern about the non-compete where we can't, if we decide to terminate, that we shouldn't be able to do anything for 3 more years in terms of this type of program? Was that reviewed by our?
I do not know. Unfortunately, I do not know the answer to that.
Other than the fact the attorney did review the entire agreement.
Okay. Just 3 years seems a little long. That's my concern.
Mr. Hart, please.
Of course, I can't point out specific parts in the draft agreement because I didn't mark them, but as I was reading it, I had the same question initially, but then later on, there are other areas where under certain conditions, the non-compete or the not going to a different program doesn't apply at all, which alleviated at least some of that concern for me.
Any additional questions? Subsequent discussion? No? Okay, well then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Rhodes, seconded by Tahar to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you again. Appreciate it. Look forward to working with you. We move on to new business item 15-129. This is community event application pep rally. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the June 11th, 2015 letter from Saline Area Schools Superintendent Graydon and to approve or not to approve the application for a community event for a pep rally on Thursday, August 20th from August 20th, of course, 2015 from 7 to 8 p.m. on South Ann Arbor Street between Michigan Ave and Henry.
Move to
Move
approve.
to.
Acknowledge receipt and approve.
Thank you. And was that a second by Ms. Dillon?
Second.
Thank you, ma'am. I know that Superintendent Graydon is not here this evening, but Kurt Ellis, Administrator from Saline Area Schools and Human Resources Director, is here. Kurt, we appreciate your time this evening. Do you care to make any comment in addition to what was enumerated in Mr. Graydon's memo?
This is the second request for this. We started the event last year and felt like we had great success kind of kicking off the school year. It was an opportunity to bring the school community downtown on a Thursday night for an hour or so, and so it was very well received, and we very much welcome the opportunity to do it again this year.
Great, very good. Are there any questions for the applicant or for the clerk's office who processed this request? No, I think it's great. Okay. Well, if there's nothing further, we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Rhodes, seconded by Dillon to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Kurt. Moving on under the new business section of our agenda, item 15-130, this is 2015 Leadership Training Agreement. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the Leadership Training Agreement and to approve or not to approve a one-year agreement between the City of Saline and the Coalition for Equality for Communities in the amount of $1,000.
Move to approve.
And acknowledge receipt, Mr. Gearbaugh?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Roth. Thank you very much. Mr. Rhodes, would you care to comment on this?
I would, briefly. We are currently accepting applications for the next Saline Leadership Institute class, which starts in September and runs for 9 months. It is basically 1 day per month, and it is a great opportunity for those who feel the need to develop their leadership skills even further than what they may be, and or to provide access to a great network of folks within the community. You do not have to be a resident of the city of Saline to participate in the event, and there are many of us in the room here who have gone through Saline Leadership Institute at one time or another. And then finally, I will have to abstain from voting because I'm the current chair of the CQC.
That abstention and those comments are duly noted, Mr. Rhodes. We will consider you abstain from voting on this motion. Any subsequent comments? Mr. Hart.
Just, I note that there isn't actually a date specified either in the motion or in the agreement itself. So might we want to specify? I just realized that now. I'm sorry I didn't catch it before.
No, we've followed a similar protocol on this particular item for at least the last couple of years. Okay. Do you recall, or what would you recommend would be appropriate, Mr. Rhodes, if we were to enumerate a date?
I think on or before September 1 would be fine, of 2015.
All right. So here's how I would read the motion then. To acknowledge receipt of the Saline Leadership Training Agreement, to approve a one-year agreement between the City of Saline and the Coalition for Quality Communities, CQC, in the amount of $1,000 to be received on or before September 1st, 2015. Mr. Gearbaugh, you were the mover of that. Would you accept that?
I guess that's fine. The only concern is, I'm wondering if the 1 year was supposed to run with the fiscal year, being July 1 to, because doesn't the program run from September to June? Okay. I'm just reading where it says, offers a 9-month training course. That's fine, whatever.
That's fine? Okay. Ms. Dillon, are you fine with that additional verbiage?
Yes,
Okay.
but it wasn't me, it was Mr. Roth.
Say what? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm fine with it.
I apologize. Yes. Mr. Roth, you were the second, not Ms. Dillon.
I'm okay with it.
Okay. All right. It's a little bit unorthodox way to deal with this issue, but I think that's a good addition. Thank you for that suggestion, Mr. Hart. If there's nothing further, Mr. Rhodes, I'm sorry.
Councilmember Gearbaugh just pointed out that under the training agreement, item A specifies a 9-month training course, which is what it used to be, but that has been shortened now, and I would offer a proposal that we just strike the time period because it may change again in the future and have it say CQC offers a training course known as, et cetera.
And that's in the support memo, correct? Okay. Very good. Duly noted. Okay. If there's nothing further, it's been properly moved by Gearbaugh and Roth with some additional language at the end. All those in favor of acknowledging receipt and approving signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 15-131. This is a series of 2 motions. Proposed merchant park improvements. The first motion, A, will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the July 1st, 2015 memo from City Manager Campbell and to approve or not to approve merchant park improvement alternative 2 in the amount of $116,907.
I'll move to acknowledge receipt right now for discussion.
All right.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Mr. Roth. Of course, Mr. Campbell is not here to address his memo, so I will be relying on Mr. Rubel, who I believe was briefed on this issue, but also, if he doesn't mind, Mr. Rhodes, because Mr. Rhodes sat in on the work group that met on this topic. So let me start with you, Mr. Rubel. Do you have any comments that you would like to articulate at this time?
No, just the fact that we, 4 staff did meet with URS, Mr. Paul Reinhold here, and who can answer questions in detail, and we did strive to reduce the extent of the work, scope of the work to the most, those items that had the highest priority and most need, and also to lower the cost as shown here. So alternate 2 becomes $42,000 less than the original estimate, and we would continue to try to refine those details. Mr. Reinhold has hired a surveyor, and his firm has a surveyor who is going to provide for more detailed drawings or basis of the drawings that will help come up with some other possibilities and to fine-tune the work. So
Very good.
that's about
Okay,
it.
appreciate that. I apologize that I didn't acknowledge you. Would you care to make any comment at this time? We would welcome that. We appreciate your work on this important matter.
Thank you. I'm just here to answer any questions if you have anything.
Okay, fair enough. Before I open it up for questions, Mr. Rhodes, since you're a member of the work group, do you care to make any comment at this time?
Yeah, the first thing is I'm a bit disappointed that we only have alternate 2 on as an approval. I thought we would have been voting on either alternate 1 or alternate 2. And further, the pricing on alternate 1, which in the cover memo is almost $160,000, I thought that we had in that work group decided that we would not do a masonry dumpster enclosure in any case. And if my memory is correct, then that would bring that price down for alternate 1 down to about $140. Obviously, still more than alternate 2. But I thought the alternate 1 was worthwhile doing.
Do you want to make any comment on that?
My recollection was alternate 1 included everything as originally designed, including the masonry dumpster enclosure. Alternative 2 is where we stepped back and tried to bring cost control measures, alternatives into the design to bring the costs down, which would have been the some type of decorative fence type enclosure, whether it's metal, wood, or some other type of material. Leave the electrical panel near or at its current location, add some additional screening, eliminate the permeable pavers and change that to just straight concrete is one of the other options that was included as part of option 2.
Yeah, and generally that's true, other than this thing about the dumpster,
Sure.
Not being masonry. I'm just under the impression that we were not going to have masonry no matter what we did.
Okay.
1 or 2, so, and that could still happen.
It could still happen, yes.
Anyway, I would have preferred to see alternate 1 on here also as a choice.
I did that because it said staff. So that was my fault.
Cool.
Staff's recommendation, so I put that down as staff recommendation, but I would put both of them.
Mr. Gearby, did you have a question, sir?
I was just going to, and you already did, highlight the changes from what the one was to the other, just to indicate what kind of significant. You already have, the biggest one I see being the electrical panel and the enclosure around.
That's
the,
correct.
dumpsters. The only thing about the enclosures around the dumpster, I would prefer it not be wood, that it be plastic and something like that,
Sure,
more decorative
sure.
plastic, something that's more
Yes.
maintainable and potentially can be fixed and replaced quicker than a masonry wall. Or whatever.
Right.
I mean, from my perspective, I think alternate 2 is at least being more cost effective. I do know there's some issues on here, potentially being the permeable paving, but if that's more an issue of attempting to be a little more decorative than being, I don't know, what was the idea with the permeable paving, to allow better drainage, or?
It's a drainage alternative so that it, we use the entire plaza area as the, to take up the water, as opposed to a single inlet.
Yeah, and currently, and the question was raised, is if you look at the plaza right now, there's large drainage tiles coming down.
Coming down from the roofs, yes.
How will those be tied in, or how will those be handled?
I don't know yet. That's part of my job. When I get the survey and know exactly where everything is coming from, I need to develop a design that takes care of all the drainage in that area. There is an inlet that is just outside of the plaza area in the parking that has sufficient depth to connect to.
And that's why I'm wondering, does this bid include the potential cost that it will be to put all those tied into that drainage?
It's an estimate based on a concept design. Once we get the survey, then I'll be able to do design development drawings and then proceed into construction drawings, where I can have a better idea of where the drainage is going to be going, how many leads need to be tied into from the roof drains, and take all that into account.
Okay, so even right now at 116, we could be looking at something significantly more. If we
It'll be my job to keep it within that budget.
I mean, I'm more concerned about the drainage issue. I think looking at that just from the other day was significantly, and so that's why when you're talking about permeable versus the other one, I want to make sure we solve the problem. And if that means having to tie those in, then we may potentially have to have a higher cost.
Well, we'll definitely have to tie them in somehow. I just don't know how yet.
Got it.
Yeah, in the task force, we had not anticipated that they would discharge onto the surface and then go to some kind of drain. We knew, as we indicated, they were going to have to go to something underground.
That's why I wanted to make sure we at least were thinking it that way, so
Sure.
thanks.
Sure.
Approximately how long to complete the survey?
It'll take probably a week to get it scheduled, and then a week once they come out and take all the spot elevations to get it back to me.
Okay. And then how long, when the survey is returned to you and you can do your assessment and renderings, how long of a turnaround then?
Probably about 3 weeks.
Other questions? Mr. Haar and then Mr. Roth?
Yes. So if I'm understanding correctly, whatever we approve tonight is not
You're not approving the design.
final answer.
Correct.
Okay, so I would then make a perhaps nitpicky comment. The issue of a sprinkler system, irrigation system, is $7,500 in the estimate. I consulted with a couple of high-level master gardeners about this how this project looks, and they both felt that using xeriscaping, which would require no irrigation at all, would be very attractive and could use native plants. And so I would just encourage you to keep that possibility in mind down the road. It might save us some money and would,
Sure.
And also perhaps future headaches
I
for
would
DPW down the road in the
anticipate-
future.
Yeah, I would anticipate seeing drip irrigation. Even with native plant materials, you're looking at some summers where you're going to need something to be able to maintain the material.
Anything further, Mr. Hart?
That's it,
Thank
thanks.
you, ma'am. Mr. Roth?
I've got several questions, but I want to thank the group for going back and reconsidering to keep the cost down. I was hoping that, I think the reason I second it is to acknowledge receipt. I don't think we have enough detailed information to approve such the dollar amount at this point in time. In that we don't have an answer exactly what the electrical panel is going to look like, as far as once the dumpster's removed. I think that I'd like to see a drawing of that so we know whether we really have one additional parking place or not. I have a question. The electrical panel, is that for controlling the lights and stuff in the parking lot, or does it do more than that?
Honestly, I don't know at this point.
Okay, can it say if it's city, for controlling city's electrical stuff, I can see where that is a cost that we could bear, but far as otherwise, if the service, some other place or building, they should share in the cost of that particular thing or be involved as a partner in this project. And I want to be sure we have partnership understanding so we don't have misunderstandings like we did in our previous alley project. So I want to be sure all things are cleared with whomever that belongs to. I also look, as far as, I'd like to see what those drawings, my concept from what the size of the dumpster area is now, and you reduce it down, it'd probably be reduced in size when it's removed to the east end of the parking lot. So I just want to be sure that all this space stuff is adequate for handling. And also have a concern that far as why do we really, do we need that extra parking space? Why do we really want that? Is it for as a visual enhancement of the Merchant Park? I don't understand the great importance of it. I do know that far as the restaurant close to that, especially during the summer, there's a fly problem, but we're going to have a fly problem wherever it might be. I also look at far as if we improve this Merchant Park, it will probably open doors for any restaurant establishment when they have seating outdoors in that particular area. So these are some concerns that I have with it. I also have a concern that far as our lease agreement that we have with it, that I think that, and it's another part B to this particular topic, I think that is way too long to extend it out to 32 years from now, because whatever we do is not going to last 32 years, as far as whatever we have with it. It's going to need some improvement in between. And so I'll address that at the part B part of it. So there's several concerns that I have with it, as far as if the people who are using the dumpster area, if they've been consulted with it, if they want to carry their garbage, and it would come from the hot dog place and Dan's, it's going to be an additional time consuming for their employees to transport that stuff down to the particular area. We will be not only tying up the traffic within the parking lot, we'll be also tying up the traffic on Hall Street. So I'm not too sure what's the best of ease for the dump truck to come around and pick up the garbage. So there's a lot of issues that I have questions with. So I think acknowledging this, and we're kind of premature to put a dollar amount on at this particular point in time.
Okay.
Anything else relating to the acknowledgement of Todd's memo dated July the 1st? No? Okay. Well, then let's proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Gearboss, seconded by Roth, to acknowledge receipt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. All right, we can do this a number of ways, my friends. Obviously, based on what Mr. Rhodes articulated earlier, he would, it sounds like, prefer to have a discussion where there was more of an opportunity to compare and contrast alternative 1 and 2, based on the fact that you seem to have a preference to option 1, or alternative 1, excuse me. There's been some concerns articulated by Mr. Roth about wanting to delay this until some of the details are flushed out and vetted. So we can proceed with voting to approve alternative 2, which is, again, what's recommended by staff, or we can take this up as an action item at a later meeting. What is your pleasure? Mr. Rhodes.
There seems to be general consensus amongst the other council members leaning towards alternate 2. So I would remove any concern that I have about not having alternate 1 on the board.
Okay, all right. Well, the chair will entertain a motion at any time.
I would like to make a motion.
Okay?
My motion is that we would table it till we have further information. I would love to have a second for that.
How about we do, if I may make a recommendation, Mr. Roth, how about we use the word postpone instead of table?
Postpone's fine.
Do you want to provide a date? Let me, our consultant, for the survey to be completed and then for your analysis to be done, we're talking about a month, is that correct?
Correct.
So would it be appropriate and reasonable if Mr. Roth made a motion to table this item to our second meeting in? Postpone, excuse me. See, I want to use the word table too. To our second meeting in August, and the clerk can remind me of that date. I'll give you more than a month. The 17th. The 17th?
I'm in favor of your
Okay, so.
cleaning it up.
All right, let me repeat it, Mr. Roth, to make sure you're still comfortable with it. So Mr. Roth would like to move that we postpone consideration of Merchant Park improvements until our August 17th, 2015 meeting. Is that correct, sir?
Correct, thank
Okay.
you.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Dillon. Okay? Discussion. Mr. Roth, do you care to speak to your motion at all? Obviously, you've stated your position rather emphatically, but I'll give you an opportunity.
I would say I would like to have more details, and URS can provide it for us, and that's why we have them done. So I'd like to have no surprises and don't like to put you under the gun that you have to keep within that budget. Well, let's have it true figures as best as we can.
As the design progresses, we'll be able to narrow things down.
Thank you.
Ms. Dillon, do you care to comment at all?
No, I'm in agreement with Mr. Roth.
Okay, very good. Ms. Tahar?
A question probably for our consultant is, what would this postponement do to our chances of having the project completed before the US 12 makeover project starts?
This late, we're pretty late in the game right now for this construction season, and I'm going to work as hard as I can to make sure that we are able to get everything done and get it opened up to the public before the snow flies. So it's important once I get back to the office that we get the survey procured, get that back to the office so that I can develop the design to a further extent. We meet on August 17th, go over the design, another estimate, and at that point, finish up the plans and get it out to bid as soon as we can.
And it is, in your opinion, still, with good luck,
With good luck.
theoretically possible to get it finished still at this construction season? Okay.
There may be some things that have to be finished in the spring.
Okay.
Additional comments? Mr. Rhodes, please.
So in doing your preliminary design, you're going to point towards alternate 2 items?
The overall concept between alternate 1 and alternate 2, there's not a great difference, so yes.
So we probably have to do this kind of delay anyway, but I have a real concern that we're not going to be able to get things done this fall yet, given the construction workload that's out there. And after you come back with a design, then there's an estimate, then we got to put together a bid package, got to go out to bid, we got to analyze those bids, we have to award the contract. It's not going to happen this fall, frankly.
Mr. Gearbaugh, do you have comments, sir?
I would agree with Mr. Rhodes. I think even if we were to do this bid tonight and everything, I don't think we'd have it in time to get somebody lined up to do it all before the snow flies, even if they partially do it. But I think this is a good approach, and I really do agree that this compromise and the way that we're going back at it, looking at cost effectiveness, will help, because I believe we've got, as we've seen tonight, additional work we have to do in the other 3 parking lots. And I think spreading it over, I know this won't gain us that extra additional parking space, but it will solve some of the problems that are up there right now.
Ms. Sibel-Keeney?
No, I don't have any comments.
No comments. Well, with, I guess, some degree of reluctance, I will support the motion. What I would encourage my colleagues to prepare for is to act emphatically and be prepared to develop some consensus when this issue, if the motion passes, when this issue is brought forward again on the 17th of August. Am I correct with that date? Yeah, okay. Because I would really like to see something done this construction season. And if I need to help you move heaven and earth to do that, I would be willing to, because I think the area in question is of strategic importance. I do see its value, and I think it's aesthetically, I think to date it's an eyesore, and I think from a safety accessibility perspective, there are a great many concerns. So I know you'll move expeditiously to complete the survey and to finalize your assessment. And if this motion passes, I look forward to having a robust discussion and hopefully moving forward on August 17th.
Sounds great.
Okay. Anything further on this motion? Mr. Hart.
Yes. Could you review again why we're waiting until the second meeting in August rather than the first?
Well, our guests can correct me if I'm wrong. You indicated approximately a month, correct?
Yes.
For the survey to be completed and then the assessment.
And for me to complete the design development plans once I receive the survey.
And again, I don't want to speak for the mover and the seconder, Mr. Har, but I suspect that it was, and maybe it was my opinion that I was trying to express in a subtle way to Mr. Roth, but I think the goal was to give URS ample time to address the concerns that were articulated this evening. Would that be correct, Mr. Roth?
Correct. I just don't want to go in things blind.
Sure, no, very reasonable. Any subsequent discussion on this item? Okay, then I'll repeat the motion. It's been moved by Roth, seconded by Dillon, to propose, how do you have it? Shall the clerk reread the motion?
I have moved by Roth, seconded by Glenn, to postpone the proposed Merchant Park improvements to the August 17th meeting.
Very good. Okay. Everyone clear on the motion? Okay, we'll proceed to vote then. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Ayes have it, the motion carries. Motion B is a motion to acknowledge receipt of the July 1st, 2015 memo from City Manager Campbell and to approve or not to approve the proposed amendments to the current lease agreement to extend the terms from August 15, 2027 to August 15, 2047, and to require Phoenix East LLC to pay $20,000 to the proposed improvements to Merchant Park.
Move to acknowledge receipt and to approve.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gearba. Is there a second?
Second?
Seconded by Ms. Cybo Koenig. Mr. Campbell's memo pretty much speaks for itself. Are there any questions or comments? Mr. Roth?
I don't understand the logic of spreading this thing out for 32 years for the money that we're putting in at this particular point in time. What that does, 32 years from now to 2047, I don't think Phoenix Property is going to be owning that particular thing, so it's going to be carried over to whomever may be owning such. That would restrict them from doing any development with it unless they would break the contract with us. I could foresee some of these buildings maybe being replaced in that particular point in time. I think that we are not fair to our predecessors that we're going to have being council members that we drag this out so far. I think it'd be just wise to let this go to 2027 or 2026, let the council members at that point in time decide whether an extension is necessary or not. I really don't see what has to be gained. It all seems to be a good deal for whoever owns that particular property. It's been a good deal struck for so long that they are not taxed on that particular parcel. They get $1 for it, but they are saving several hundred dollars per year, 600 or more plus per year on taxes that they're not paying. Part of that comes to the city, but it's also the other taxing authorities been shortchanged their taxes likewise with that. Yes, it's captured by TIFA funds, but I think that we are not fair to our predecessors and to the people putting this thing out to 2047, 32 years from now. I think we should let things as is, and I need to be convinced of why it needs to be extend it. As far as I just cannot digest it myself, so I'd welcome any of my colleagues on the council here to help me better understand what the benefits are for it being to extend it the extra 20 years.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Roth. Mr. Gearbaugh, is the mover of the motion. You care to comment?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I'm wanting to extend it is because of us putting the significant investment into this, and also trying to amortize this over a decent period of time. I think tying it up for 30 years, even though potentially maybe something will come in the future, we can always renegotiate an agreement. That's always doable. They may have to reimburse us for what costs we place into it, plus any kind of adjustment for that. My concern is that if we don't do it, in 12 years, we've lost $100,000, and we're only spending, we don't know what would happen in that 12-year period. So as long as we have an extension out of there, we're putting significant money into this. And when I look at this memo that Catherine Scull prepared, the city is foregoing $155 a year, which be over the period of time would be approximately $5,000, so forth. The overall taxing bodies within the county would be losing approximately $573. The question is, what are we really looking to do? Is we're really trying to solve the problem here in Saline and making sure that our downtown is supported. And I want to make sure that whatever we invest in has a recent and has a decent length of period of time of return and a decent period of time in which we can take benefit of that investment that we place into it. So that is the reason why I've been requesting this. And then also, this agreement assures us that we're going to get the $20,000 to help contribute towards this project if it goes forward as we've been proposing. I believe that's the understanding that I have from this.
Any additional comments from council members? Mr. Rhodes, please.
I support Councilmember Gerlach's position because if we don't extend it in 2027, then we're done. By extending it out to 2047, if either party wants to make a change, there's room to negotiate then and to retain some of the benefit that we put into that space. Very good.
Any additional comments? Mr. Roth.
I understand the logic. I'm going to thank him for explaining such. I think 20 years is a little bit too long a period. 10 years would make more sense because whatever we do now, 40 or 32 years from now, is not going to have any, it's not going to be in effect. It's going to be way before then needing to be repaired and helped. So but what we do, I don't think it's going to last more than 20 years.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. If there's nothing further, we'll proceed to vote then. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Dillon. I apologize.
That's okay. My question is sort of in line with what Mr. Ross has just said, which is I'm concerned about the longevity of this project. And as Mr. Gearbaugh had said, we're going to amortize it out. But in that period, are we going to be having to do another project which is going to piggyback on that amortization? And so that's where my concern lies in the 20 additional years, is this current project will not last that long, so we will be doing some sort of maintenance to it.
Okay. Fair enough. Mr. Gearbaugh, do you want to comment?
Yeah, but I believe the project we currently have, or the current condition, was originally put in there in 1985 or approximately.
86, 85,
so it's
86.
almost 30 years old, and unfortunately the majority of the damage that's occurred to it is because drainage wasn't done properly. The trees that were placed in there have gotten overgrown and some of those type of things. We're now accounting for that to make sure that that doesn't occur, and the likelihood of the lifespan of this being 20 to 30 years, I think, will be better than it was when it was put in before. Yes, we'll potentially have our thaws and our freezes, but a reasonable period of 20 to 25 years, or even 30, is expected of this. I don't think it's the same that we were doing 30 years ago where we didn't account for those problems.
Anything further? Ms. Tahar, please.
Yeah, yes, thank you. I would say I support the extension of the lease also because it gives us a relationship with this property and a say over what happens. Even if the agreement is changed down the road, the city is contractually, agreement-wise, a stakeholder here and has a say in what happens. And I think that's a very important point for me.
And just to tag on to that one, it also provides for additional access to those different properties that are there, because that always has been a concern regardless of whatever four corners we're dealing with, is there's buildings on property that seem to be private, and access to those buildings has been usually maintained through some agreement with the city. And this one helps to encourage that because all those properties are not owned by the same owner.
Okay, very good, very robust discussion. If there's nothing further, we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Gearboss, seconded by Cybo Koenig to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Ayes have it, and the motion carries. We move on to new business item 15-132. This is proposed ordinance number 770, zoning for McDonald's annexed property. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the June 26, 2015 memo from Assistant Clerk Daham and to approve or not to approve proposed ordinance number 770, an ordinance to zone land newly annexed to the city of Saline to SPA 1.
To acknowledge and approve.
Thank you, Councilwoman Dillon. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes, excuse me. Mr. Rubel, do you care to comment on this?
Council recently authorized the annexation resolution, and I believe Pittsfield Township has also. This is was a condition also of the site plan approval for the site plan changes that are now taking place at McDonald's. And so with this little parcel being added, which is parcel 3 of the McDonald's parcel, the whole parcel will become within the city as property and as a zone plan.
Are there any questions for Mr. Rubel or staff? No? Any subsequent discussion? No, then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Dillon, seconded by Rhodes to approve or acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. Moving on to new business item 15-133. This is bids for city sidewalk repairs. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the July 1st, 2015 memo from DPW Director Fordyce and to approve or not to approve the agreement with Precision Concrete Incorporated in the amount of $236,430 for the elimination of sidewalk vertical separations and to authorize or not authorize the mayor to sign the agreement upon review and approval by the city attorney.
I move to acknowledge, approve, and authorize.
Thank you, Councilmember Roth. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Tahar. Mr. Rubel, do you care to comment at all on this issue, and in particular, Mr. Fordyce's memo dated July the 1st?
Well, the brief memo from DPW Director Fordyce is pretty explanatory here, and you mentioned earlier in your State of the City speech about the 90% number of reaching out and addressing those major trip hazards and concerns that we have out there. And the bid is reasonable, and we look forward to getting this work done.
Very good. Any questions for staff? Mr. Roth.
I just want to clarify that none of this improvement is going to be assessed to the property owners.
Correct.
Just want to be sure that was clear.
Yeah, well, you're utilizing Metro funds as I believe I verbalized in my State of the City address, but very good point. Thank you, Mr. Roth. Mr. Gearbaugh and then Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes.
Just real quick, how did we track the 10% that will eventually have to be replaced? Will that be part of what they survey, or just curious how we're going to know what that is in order to move forward in the future?
In subsequent years, we will have to devise a program based on rules and guidelines that will be considered at some subsequent work meetings with council,
But do
and
we have a
perhaps
survey
a modification of the ordinance.
We do.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we do have a survey currently that points out where those problems are.
Correct. If you look at the charts, they separate. If the charts in the memo attachments, it lists the defects A through D. We're addressing the A defects, which is the vertical separation. The B through, the other alphabets are the different other different defects.
Got it. Thanks. I just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh. Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes.
Is it feasible to ask for any kind of a warranty with this work?
Well, it's very, very difficult with the trees involved with raising the roots, and also freeze thaw in wintertime based on soil conditions, and saturation of the soil. So we're at the mercy of nature, which actually can't really be warranted.
Okay. I thought that probably would be the answer, but I wanted to.
Yeah.
Anything further? Well, even though he's not here, I want to commend DPW Director Fordyce, on his work on this issue. This has been a priority of mine, and I ultimately believe a great number of community members as well. So I'm pleased that this is coming to fruition. I do think it's a reasonable amount, considering the amount of work that's going to take place. And I think ultimately, when the work is completed, our citizens and community stakeholders will notice a substantial improvement in the community's walkability. So It's a good night, and I enthusiastically endorse the motion. Anything further? No, then it's been properly moved by Ross, seconded by Tahar, to acknowledge receipt and to approve and authorize. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Last action item on the agenda this evening is new business item 15-134. This is the purchase of a new police vehicle. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the June 29th, 2015 memo from Police Chief Rennick and to approve or not to approve the purchase of a 2015 Chevrolet Tahoe two-wheel drive PPV patrol vehicle from Kelly Chevrolet at a not-to-exceed amount of $30,600 and to have the vehicle outfitted at Great Lakes Emergency Products at amount not to exceed $9,920.68, and for the purchase and installation of the in-car computer at an amount not to exceed $2,751.25.
Move to acknowledge receipt and to approve.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes. Is there a second?
Second?
Seconded by Councilwoman Cybo Koenig. Chief Rennick, do you care to comment on this at all?
Just real quickly, normally we would wait until the next model year, but the 2016s haven't been tested yet, and I was fortunate enough to have a conversation while I was up at the Police Chiefs Conference just 2 weeks ago that there is going to be a significant, is the word that they used, increase in the 2016 versus 2015 model. I called Crispin Chevrolet and asked them if they would be willing to do a dealer trade of some type, and he said that it would be impossible to do that, and then he gave me the name of a dealership in Indiana, and they had 10 different units, 2015 units in stock that they were just selling out to police departments. In fact, Chelsea PD and Fenton PD, just north of here, put their names in for one. I put my name on one quickly and said I had a council meeting on the 6th, and so I believe that if we approve this, or if you approve this, I'm sorry, that the city could end up saving significant monies because the new ones are going to be significantly higher. And one conversation was $3,000 to $5,000 more.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions for the Chief Rennick? Mr. Roth?
Am I reading this right? It's going to be red over blue?
I believe you're reading that wrong. It's actually going to be a black one again this year.
I didn't know what the red over blue meant on this quote.
Oh, no.
Mr. Gearbaugh?
What's the total number of Tahoes we have now? Or
That will make 5, which will complete our fleet.
And our oldest one is how old?
Tahoe or oldest vehicle?
Oldest vehicle.
Our oldest vehicle is a 2008. That's a Ford Crown Vic, and that has 117,000 miles on it.
So we still have one Crown Vic that we're still using.
Right.
Anything further? Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Any subsequent discussion on this item? No, then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Rhodes, seconded by Cybo Koenig to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to discussion items. First up is commission, committee, and task force reports from council members. No? Mr. Rhodes?
I do have it.
Okay.
I had made my notes on the former agenda, so
Oh,
I
okay.
had to relocate it. But now I got my reading glasses on. Environmental Commission, we have 10 public service announcement videos and 3 more in process. And in fact, the video about rain barrel construction was posted today and will show up on Channel 18 periodically. And we are staffing the farmers market on July 18th that morning. We also have completed 7 blog posts and 2 more in process. And then Ms. Hess pointed out that the senior center does not have a formal recycling program, and so I met with Rena Shemin and Rex Clary, and that program has now been put into place. So I appreciate bringing that up to our attention. Parks Commission, Green Thumb Award nominations are still going on. You can nominate through July, and the various parks are being cleaned up. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Mr. Gearbaugh?
I forgot, Planning Commission. Just thought I'd bring the council up to speed that we discussed the Cypress Ridge, which is a former Houghton School property, and it's moving quite forward. And I believe Mr. Rubel may be able to comment on that, about when they may potentially start moving soil and doing some things.
They were authorized by the Planning Commission a limited grading permit, so they can start work while they're working on completing and presenting a condominium agreement and master deed bylaws for review. And as we do the final review of the engineering plans, we also need to obtain permits for the water and sewer lines and a joint permit for the storm sewer outlet. So technical work is in progress, and the council should see at some point the condominium agreement for your consideration.
So that's a good thing that we're seeing move forward.
Absolutely. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Gearba. Any other commission, committee, or task force reports from council members? No. How about reports or other announcements? Ms. Tahar.
Yeah, I will just note, I happened to be in my front yard at about 8:15 this morning, and I saw the new street sweeper go by. It's very shiny, and it did a great job.
Any other reports or announcements? I have one that I would offer to the group for consideration, and it seems particularly timely considering we're just coming off a 4th of July holiday weekend. Fireworks. I think that we're probably due for another article in our FYI newsletter and something on our city website that notifies our citizens of what the rules are. But more significantly, as you all know, and when I say you all, I'm referring to those of you on the dais, that the state has really hindered our ability to regulate and control that to a sufficient degree. There are a number of legislators working on bills that would give more power to local jurisdictions to regulate and control the discharging of what is essentially a commercial grade firework. And although I'm not under any illusion that it will have a profound impact, I would like to prepare a resolution and bring it forward at a subsequent council meeting, encouraging our elected officials in Lansing to make some changes in statute. Because I think, let me be very clear. I should have prefaced by saying this. I've used commercial fireworks. I enjoy them. I think there's probably a great many people who enjoy them. I think the amount of time in which you are able to discharge them is excessive, and I think that in a densely populated area, it can become a public safety issue. So I would welcome thoughts from my council colleagues, but again, it would be my inclination to bring forward a resolution encouraging our elected officials to amend that statute and give us more control and say over the regulation of commercial fireworks. Any thoughts?
I would support a resolution to that effect.
Okay, Mr. Gearbaugh?
And to address just the safety concerns that potentially are happening, there's been too many deaths and injuries that have happened within just the last week that I know there's an issue of it's similar like guns. The firework isn't killing the person, it's the person using it, but still, I think there's a lot more attempt to try and either educate or something that's going to have to be done because this is just making it ridiculous. And the worst thing about the enforcement that you're talking about is that you just don't know where the fireworks are going off. I mean, I've been listening for them for the last week and a half, and I'm kind of certain where they're coming from, but you can't tell. And unfortunately, when they're going off at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, that's when I think we really should be able to enforce something.
Support that, Ms. Tahar?
Yes, I would support, and I would also ask, did we have any accidents
You aware of any, Chief?
at all, or injuries? Okay, but still I would support
Okay.
also.
Mr. Roth?
Support of it,
Okay,
yes.
Ms. Dillon?
Yes, I would support.
Well, I will prepare something for your review and probably bring it forward at our next meeting in July, but more realistically, probably one of our meetings in August. And Mr. Rubel, since it really is, I guess maybe between Mr. Rubel and the Building and Engineering Department and Chief Rennick, can we work on an article again that could be in the FYI newsletter on this subject? I think, one, telling people what the regulations are, and secondarily saying that to a certain extent, at least in the current time, our hands are really tied in terms of what we as a municipality can do to regulate that. And then maybe something on the website as well. Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. If there are no additional reports or announcements, let's move on to downtown parking. And Chief, I would welcome you back up to the podium. There's, of course, a memo from Saline Main Street on this issue, which our Main Street Director referenced in his comments at the beginning of the meeting. Chief, I know we have received some preliminary data from your office. Do you care to comment any more on the parking enforcement issue?
Well, just an update, as of the end of June, we have now committed 100 hours of law enforcement towards parking in downtown area, and now there have been a total of 254 citations issued. So that has increased a little bit. I did have an opportunity to take a quick look at the memo from Saline Main Street and the couple of suggestions that came out of there. I do have a few concerns on some of the suggestions, the short-term fixes. The one being giving a verbal warning the first time. That's a record-keeping issue that would have to be developed, because the only way that the officer on the street would know whether a ticket had been issued or not issued, he'd have to call into dispatch, and they would have to check some type of a database to find out if in fact a ticket had ever been written before, to determine whether they're going to give a warning or give a ticket. And then the second one, which is the one about where the fines go up. Once again, I think that's going to be a little bit more difficult than what it currently is. The same thing would have to occur. There'd have to be a database, and if your vehicle was ticketed one time, it would be put in there that it received a $10 ticket. Then when they gave it the next time, it would be then a $20 ticket, $30 ticket, whatever, whatever fines would come up. I think it makes it a little bit more cumbersome to do it that way. I don't know that those are the right fixes, but I'm sure there's something that could be done to make it better than what it is.
Okay. Riley, would you care to make any additional comments at this time regarding parking enforcement? And of course, then I can open it up to the group to see if they have any questions regarding your memo dated July the 1st.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to make clear with the two suggestions here, they're actually not recommendations. These are what other communities have done. Like I stated, a lot of other communities have DDAs run their downtown parking. They have hired people to check meters, in that sense, not police department. So this is just recommendations that we've heard from the other communities at the MDA conference. So I want to make sure he doesn't feel like this is what we feel is best. They're just suggestions in that sense to help you guys make a decision. So.
Questions for the chief or our Main Street director, Mr. Gearbaugh?
One of the things when I was reading the surveys and the responses back was the concern about having parking lots that are open and that we seem to have, parking spaces, and the idea that I would like to see is probably expanding more longer-term 8-hour parking spaces or whatever, like we have talked about, to make it a little bit more balanced than what we currently have. Because it is true, if we've got a parking lot and no one's parking there throughout the whole day, we need to balance that better. I would like to see that happen and how we would approach that, which may mean that, like on parking lot number 2 behind Comerica Bank, we would designate a larger portion that would be for 8 to 10-hour parking or something, and balance it differently. But it's how you would see it, and I think that would be a solution. The other one, when you mentioned about the tickets, what about the potential of having the 24-hour window where we used to have, or like Ann Arbor used to have? If you got a ticket, you could pay it within 24 hours and only cost you $2 or $5.
Well, we actually kind of have that. It's a little bit more than that, but if you pay it within the day that you receive it, it's a $10 ticket as opposed to a $20 ticket.
Yeah, and see, I'm thinking if we made it even a little more incentive-wise, that might be a better way to avoid having everybody upset. Whether or not it gets paid is one thing, but at least if you do it within I think it used to be within a 2-hour period in Ann Arbor. But they did away with it too, because they don't have the issue that we have where we potentially have open spaces. They always have theirs full.
An hour and a half.
To park it, yeah, I know.
Any other questions for our Main Street director or for the chief? Well, again, as I indicated previously, I am looking for consensus on how best to move forward. Mr. Gearbaugh verbalized some thoughts, which I appreciate, and I guess I'll go first here. My intent is not to muddy the water, but I suspect that I'm going to do that. I'm really ambivalent, and I use that word deliberately, on the whole parking enforcement issue. I view our public parking lots and spaces as public resources, and as valued public resources, they need to be managed. And I am ambivalent about how best to move forward. I think that enforcement has resulted in not quite a paradigm shift, but a change in behavior. And for the most part, it's a change in behavior for the better. I also understand and sympathize with some of the concerns and angst that have been verbalized and shared with from members of the business community. And I'm also particularly sensitive about this coming year, 2016, and what impact the reconstruction of US 12 and the modernization of our streetscape is going to have on our downtown businesses. And I don't want to do anything more to discourage people from coming to our downtown and patronizing our shops and restaurants and you know, getting serviced at the insurance offices and the lawyers' offices that exist in our downtown. A couple things that I am emphatic about as we move forward and as we recreate the code enforcement officer's position, which has been vacant now for more than 5 years, I do believe it would be more prudent and appropriate to have code enforcement enforcing the control orders in our parking lots as opposed to the police department. I also think, and these are some small changes, and I think I mentioned this to you in the past, Chief, one of the things, and this surprises me, but it's been shared by a number of people, is a few people are simply unaware of the fact that they can pay that ticket 24 hours a day. And so they assume that City Hall closes at 5 and can no longer accept their payment. And when, of course, they let it go an extra day, they have to pay more. So I think there needs to be some, if we continue enforcement, there needs to be some verbiage on the ticket indicating that they can pay that fee 24 hours a day at Saline Dispatch. I think that's critical. I also agree to a certain extent with Mr. Gearbaugh's line of thinking. He referenced Ann Arbor, I would reference Lansing where I work, and I'll preface by saying I've received a fair amount of tickets in downtown Lansing. It's part of the public record, you can look it up. But in Lansing, it's a tiered system, but if you receive that ticket and pay it within, I think, 3 hours, it's $5, which I think would be a more appropriate, reasonable approach. And of course, their parking enforcement is generally from 9 to about 6, and there are municipal parking offices located throughout downtown, and if you get that ticket, you just go to the office and pay it. And I think after that 3 hours, then it jumps to maybe 10, and then by the next day, it goes up to 15 and 20. So, again, not to muddy the water, I'm really ambivalent about enforcing and how we enforce in our parking lots. I would be amenable to some sort of compromise, and I welcome the thoughts of my colleagues on council. Mr. Rhodes, please.
I support the recommendation, primary recommendation from Saline Main Street about that we need to continue enforcement. Now, what that enforcement needs to be, I'm not certain at this point in time. But as the mayor stated, it has resulted in a paradigm shift, so we do in fact have empty spaces now for clients, customers, visitors to park in, as opposed to all the spaces, the majority, many of the spaces being taken up by employees or business owners. And particularly with Michigan Avenue makeover happening in 2016, it's even more critical that any visitors to our community perceive that parking is there and available for them and easy to access. So I believe we need to continue an enforcement program. I believe there's also merit to Councilmember Gearbaugh's suggestion about having some additional designated longer-term spaces in maybe all of the lots, so that there's that possibility for people to stay longer. I like the other suggestion of the business owners having a card, a placard, that they could then date and time and give to their customer if that customer anticipates being in a spot for longer than whatever the designated time period is that they're parked in. I think that's a valuable thing to do, and we should seriously consider that. That's my comments.
You good? Okay. Well, let's just continue working down the dais. Mr. Gearbaugh, do you want to expand on your comments earlier?
No, I think I think we can balance out the parking so it is a little more appropriate. The issue is until we get to next year, which when we lose a lot of parking spaces, we are going to have to probably do some kind of additional enforcement just from the perspective we won't have the volume that we currently have, and what is open now will be filled. I like the idea of expanding some of the long-term, just because I think that does address some of the issue of why do we have a parking lot and we can't use it? And if there are a few, I mean, balancing it that way, and if you have to change it every once in a while. When I was working with the School of Dentistry, working the parking structure, we used to have to adjust that for patient volume during the year and whatever else. So that made a consistent approach to at least balance so that you didn't have that problem with parking all the time.
Can I ask you a follow-up question, Mr. Gearbaugh? And I certainly don't disagree. If we were to establish more long-term parking in each of the, I mean, all of our lots are restricted, but the more restrictive lots, what sort of duration would you like to put, or would you recommend putting on those spots? 8 hours, 10 hours, 12? Do you have a thought?
Well, when we start talking about employees, it'd be 10 hours, because the issue is 8 hours isn't going to cover a regular shift.
So you'd be amenable to 10?
Yeah, normally I wouldn't say that, but at this point, until we're maxed out on our parking and that all the lots are full, I think 10 hours is sufficient.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Ms. Seibel-Koenig?
I jotted down my notes. Yes, I think the enforcement has created a positive change in the lots. I'd like to see, I do support the idea of the code officer being involved in parking enforcement. I do agree with Councilmember Gearbach about the balancing of long and short-term parking spots. I'm going to kind of guess when we started out, it was an arbitrary sort of, let's do this many spots. I don't think it was ever meant to be a finite, final decision. So I think it needs to be reviewed. I'm in favor of some type of a tiered system for payment. I'd like to see a lower payment if you pay it right away, $2 or $5, or a written warning. I support all of those. That's about it.
Okay. Let me throw out one other thing that I failed to mention in my comments that I think would be appropriate moving forward. And to give credit where credit's due, I believe it was first verbalized by Ms. Tahar. I do think moving forward, we need a better understanding of how we can best manage this resource, and secondarily, how we need to plan for the future to accommodate our community's parking needs. And since none of us are experts, I think it would be valuable in the next year to engage some outside organization or individual to do a comprehensive analysis and assessment. You know, on numerous occasions, I have talked about making data-driven decisions. I really believe that. It's not just hollow rhetoric. I think that would be particularly helpful. So with that, Mr. Har, I'll turn it over to you.
You stole my thunder.
I'm sorry. I did give you credit,
That
though.
was, yes, thank you. Yes, that was it. I agree with Ms. Seibel-Koenig's summary of the issues discussed so far. And what I wanted to say was I found it very interesting to read the comments section of the survey. Wrote really big next to one of the sections, everybody's an expert. Meaning, of course, ironically, nobody's an expert, because the comments are at complete odds one with another, people's opinions, and we all think we have the answer. I don't know who these are, so I'm not picking on someone, but I will just choose one example from the comments. One of the comments talks about stopping the ridiculous practice of ticketing cars in empty lots, and then in the same sentence talks about how we need more parking in the city to complement our empty lots. I'm just citing that as an example of the fact that we don't know what we're doing, and we all have opinions because we all park, and we want each of us wants our own individual little or bigger problem solved, but we really need the overview and the expert, and we need to understand how to manage this this resource appropriately for the city and for the businesses that are here.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Roth.
I agree with the position that Councilmember Seibel-Koenig had in all regards. I little bit leery on hiring someone to do some investigations, especially this coming year, because we're upside down with Main Street. We're upside down with new parking needs for new businesses that's in town. that's gonna be kind of an irritable spot. We need time for it to work out so we can get some true data information. So I think we need to wait a little bit on that, and maybe we get some resolutions as we go along. That I hate to throw money at something that it's not gonna give us the best results because of the irritable time that we have. And I think we'll pull through it.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Dillon?
I actually completely disagree with Mr. Roth. Sorry. I think that we are completely not proficient in parking, and we do need to seek expert advice, especially at this time, because things are going to be in such turmoil, that we need to find someone that can point us in the right direction so that we're not coming back here every meeting saying, let's add 3 spaces here, let's move 4 over here, because we're just playing a game, a shell game. And my other concern is the code enforcement officer, which is a part-time position, and how much of that time is going to be taken up with parking when we actually need code enforcement done.
Well, let me try to, actually, I think this is going to be easier than I had initially thought. And I'll just ask these questions and get a show of hands. How many are in favor of staff beginning to research what sort of organizations and individuals are available out there who could do a comprehensive analysis on how best we can manage our public parking? Okay, all right. Yeah, and obviously that would come back for council's review and discussion and ultimate approval if that was the consensus of the majority. Okay. Is everybody then, at least to a certain extent, comfortable with the city continuing to enforce parking downtown? Show of hands. Okay. Is there any disagreement with Mr. Gearbaugh's suggestion about perhaps having the police department, I would think would be the best entity, to evaluate the creation of some additional, not long-term parking, just extended parking in the 4 most restricted lots, if that makes sense?
Or 3. I think we have a problem in number 1 no matter what.
So you would just want to create...
In the areas where we know that we have recurring open spaces.
Okay.
2 and 4.
2 and 4. 2 and 4. Would you say that? Why don't you come up to the podium here, Chief? Because we're probably going to have to engage you on a number of topics.
Okay. The only question I have with that is, if you're talking a 10-hour space, something like that, I mean, that's all we could force for at this point in time. So if they're there 10 hours and they just stay all night, there would be no enforcement to a 10-hour. So either we have to just make them all long-term, or it has to be something significantly less than 10 hours.
I mean, keep the 8 hours. But the issue is the ones that are going to be using that long-term aren't necessarily customers or some of the employees and such, and at least at this period of time. Your recommendation. I'm trying to figure out what would be best. Because where we're seeing it, I think that concern is the individuals that are parking in a 4-hour, if they potentially were in an 8-hour parking spot, they would get a ticket.
Right. The only other problem with an 8-hour one is that then you have to split that up amongst the marker of the tire and the enforcer of the tire, and that doesn't always work well. So my recommendation would be is if you want to create additional long-term spots, that they just be all-day parking spots, and they're just not enforced like the current all-day parking spots are. However many of those would be that you would increase.
So you do a block of them.
A block.
Expand the block that we have in the other one.
Yes.
That's fine.
Could you, I'm assuming there's consensus from council, could you in the next couple weeks before our next meeting do an assessment on that and come back with a recommendation of how many spots that would be and where they'd be located in the various lots?
Yes.
Okay. Is there consensus to do that?
For 2 and 4.
For 2 and 4, is that the...
2 and 4.
Does Main Street feel that would that help?
Riley, why don't you come up to the podium too and just stay put for a minute?
Yes, I think that would be a great option to look into that.
And maybe what I'll do is I'll work with Riley on that as well.
Okay.
I think Art would probably help with the chamber. I know Art's mapped out a lot of the downtown parking spots already.
Whoever you need to engage, Chief.
Okay.
Okay. So we've got consensus so far to create some additional long-term parking spaces in lots 2 and 4, is that correct? Okay. to engage an outside resource or individual to do a parking assessment. I commented on this, I believe Mr. Gearbuck commented on it, and Ms. Seibel-Koenig did as well, about a more tiered approach to traffic citations. Would people be amenable to, if you pay it in the first, it's now $10 for the first 24 hours, correct?
That's correct.
You want to throw out something, Ms. Seibel-Koenig?
I like the idea of the $5 within 3 hours.
Yeah, I think 5 and
5 and 3 hours? People feel okay about that? Ms. Dillon, you okay with that?
I'm fine with that.
Okay. Mr. Rhodes? Sure. Okay.
Enough to be a little bit of a nudge and enough to realize not to do it again.
The only other thing I'll need consensus on, and of course some of these items will come back, is how do people feel about Main Street's, it's not really a proposal or recommendation, but the idea of distributing to businesses some parking passes that they could then pass along to their customers.
I don't know how you would regulate them.
No, go ahead, please.
I don't know how you would regulate that.
Well-
Because you're going to have a customer come into your business, give them a ticket, make them go back out to their vehicle to come back into your business. And then would you collect it? Is it a one-day pass where they're date stamped?
Rodney, do you want to comment on that?
A lot of these-
I had similar concerns. when talking to
Yeah,
city
the cards that we've seen from, and I can get the community and try to get the information on the card at another time, but it would be up to the business owner to decide. Let's say somebody comes in and eats at a restaurant and decides, I'm going to go shopping afterward. They plan on staying longer than 4 hours. Maybe they're going to go to the farmer's market on a Saturday, grab something to eat and shop. If that particular business owner knows that person's going to stay there longer than 4 hours as a visitor, they would actually write the date down on the card. They'd be able to put it in their car, and then they would be able to stay that entire day, that date on that card.
But then how do you regulate how many cards a business is issuing at
Yeah,
any given time?
that'd be something to look into then with each business, so.
Probably they would be numbered.
Yeah, there'd be number system, you know what I mean, recognizing cars, like, so an employee that typically, you know what I mean, you'd notice if a business owner was riding it for his employee, that same car would continually have one, hopefully, so that would be one way, so. And like with parking, people are always gonna try to find ways to beat the system, so.
I find the idea sort of neat and novel, but I think it would just be overly convoluted.
Right.
So I'm not in favor of doing that this time.
Sort of wondering about the reverse of that. The card is kind of an interesting thing, and then you said it would be difficult to issue warnings, right? So a first-time offender automatically gets a ticket at this point. I wonder if sort of the idea of this goodwill card kind of thing, in a situation where a patron or a visitor comes and they do spend longer than 4 hours and they do get a ticket, if they went into a business and said, hey, I've been down here, I've been here, and here, and I've been shopping, could the business owners have a couple discretionary cards that they could give to that person to take to City Hall, and it could be stapled to the ticket, and that ticket could be waived with a warning? So I'm just trying the concept of the card is interesting, but maybe the program needs to be figured out.
Yeah, and I can give you guys more information from other communities beyond that.
I get what you're saying, Ms. Seibel-Koenig, and I don't necessarily disagree on the surface. I just think it would be so convoluted.
Yeah, it's complicated either way.
Mr. Gearbuck?
I think going with the extended additional long-term parking spaces will help assist that issue. I just don't want to see where all of a sudden you see 4 or 5 cars in a 4-hour parking space, and then we have the same issue we had before with parking lot number 1. I think the solution now is do what we've kind of recommended now, but get this individual to come in and do a study so that we can kind of get an assessment of what's going on. We keep tweaking it, I think.
Right.
We've tweaked it a little bit now, and I think it's addressing some of the issues until we get a better idea exactly what would be best. Just do the little ones.
And
Mr. Rhodes, are you comfortable with that?
I'm okay with their recommendation or suggestion of number 1, as long as it's time-stamped, date and time-stamped when it's issued. And it is true that it's a little bit convoluted, but it's the visitor who has to put the effort out. They're the ones who have to walk back to their car and put the thing on there, and if they want to do it. If they don't want to do it, then it's a non-issue, and they move within 4 hours.
Mr. Harn?
Yes, I'm in favor of of trying this. I think that there are some business owners who have expressed that they have certain loyal customers who often come for an entire day. More than one business owner has expressed this. Business owners know who their good customers are. And it seems to me that we could depend on them to regulate for any possible, I mean, I think not doing this because we're afraid, oh, someone might abuse it, we would miss an opportunity to let the business owners really work with their good customers.
Okay.
So I'm in favor.
Okay, Mr. Roth?
I agree with you that it could be convoluted. I think that as far as giving it to the business owners, it'd be great, but at this point in time, parking is free. If the business owners purchase those cards, that would be a different story. So many communities have, or businesses, or with a DDA, there is a parking assessment along with it. Ours is totally free, and I think that that could be really open up for being convoluted. I think with going with extending it to all-day parking in the lots are a better solution. And I think it's just far as, it's opening it up for judgments that people are going to say, this isn't fair, one merchant's doing over another merchant, and it's going to be, they're going to be used, and they're going to be put on the spot making judgments likewise.
Ms. Dillon?
I think this conversation just, once again, goes back to the point that we are not proficient in parking, and we should not be making decisions.
But we've been doing it for months.
Yeah. But on the issue of cards, you are...
I am not in favor of them.
All right, fine. So it looks like we have consensus not to proceed with the card, for lack of a better way to articulate it. Gentlemen, so Chief, we'll be hearing more from you in 2 weeks about the creation of some new long-term parking spaces in lots 2 and 4. Do you need any, do you need an official motion from us at a subsequent meeting to change the initial offense for a parking ticket from 10 to 5?
Yes, there would have to be something along those lines. And then if in fact you decide to increase the extended parking, it would be a matter of me writing a TCO and then council approving it.
Correct, okay. So we will take some subsequent action on these issues then at future meetings. Okay, very good. Anything else?
Just one last thing I'd like to say. Just, matter of fact, it was funny. I was watching the evening news tonight, just on the way in, and there was one community that did a moratorium for a day for the summertime for their parking. Just saying, you know, on Mondays they're allowed to park free as something as a benefit to their customers. Just a thought. So we're not the only ones struggling with this.
No. I just want to make sure we at Saline Main Street think that it's important to look at the customers first, and then look at the employees and businesses' needs in the downtown. So moving forward with those suggestions, they're options from other communities and not recommendations from Saline Main Street to do that.
Well, we appreciate you sharing them, Riley, and we appreciate the work you and your colleagues at Saline Main Street have done on this issue. Just to reiterate, enforcement will continue. Obviously, we'll be establishing in very short order some additional long-term parking spots in 2 of our public parking lots, and offering people who violate the rules a more reduced rate if they can pay in a pretty finite period of time. But what I'm really pleased about is there is broad consensus to bring in an outside entity or individual to do an assessment on how best we can manage this resource. So, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Well, good discussion. Anything further on this? No? Okay. Then we have, and I can actually speak briefly to both of these next 2 issues on the discussion portion of the agenda. Sidewalks, a letter that you should have all received from Marion Foppel. You should have also received a communique from Scott Smith, our lead counsel, indicating that he also received a letter from Ms. Foppel, and that he will be prepared to address this issue at our next meeting on July 20th when he attends for the purposes of discussing code and ordinance changes as well as the sale of the Monroe Street property. I'm hoping to add this particular issue, that letter in particular, at the end of the work meeting on the 20th. If we're unable to get to it, Scott will be prepared to discuss it and how best to move forward, probably during the discussion portion of that agenda, if that makes sense to everyone. Okay? And then we're going to take a similar approach unless there are objections to the last issue on the discussion portion of the agenda. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that last name because I would butcher it, so my apologies. You should have all received a letter from that individual, either a hard copy or an electronic copy. That has also been received and forwarded to staff. Scott Smith will also be prepared to address that issue, but in addition to getting Scott's opinions and comments, I thought it would be valuable to get the city treasurer's take on the issue. And the city treasurer, as you know, is on vacation this week. Otherwise, she would have been able to attend tonight's meeting and comment on the letter. So that issue will also be brought up again and discussed at our next meeting on the 20th. Okay? Good. If there's nothing further to discuss, Mr. Gearbaugh.
Just real quick, Gary, I noticed there was big construction happening at Speedway. Is that just changing of gas station pumps and such, or?
I could check with the building department, but they recently requested a improvement in lighting. So they want to put new LED lights in the canopy as well as LED entrance lights. So I think some of that, a lot of the work except around the pumps may be the lighting going in, but they may be doing some.
The whole thing's shut down, so.
Yes.
Do you want to confirm that and,
Yes.
and have Todd send out a communique to council? Okay, thank you. Ms. Sabakani?
The gentleman who submitted the water letter is Neil Bhattacharya.
Bhattacharya, thank you very much. Bhattacharya, very good. Okay. If there's nothing further, we come to public comments. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time and make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested, but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments?
Mary Hess, I appreciate really our parking lots and the extent of your concern in doing it properly. But the pictures that I distributed tonight, they are individual problems. And I would hope that these could be fixed as far as rather than, these could be fixed before the Saline or the Salt Springs brewery opens up, or, I would like to have some kind of communication that you apparently have received them and you're concerned on the safety issues on these parking lots. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hess. Additional citizen comments?
Art Trapp from the Saline Chamber. I'm not a DPW person, but I do know what's in that electrical box. Aside from a lot of litter, a couple of used coffee cups, and an old rusty screwdriver, that electrical box controls the lighting for the street lights on North Ann Arbor Street, the north side of Michigan Avenue, both sides of the street, and also in the parking lot. I'm sure there's other things in there that maybe I'm not aware of, like the timer and whatever else. But anyways, that's the majority of the stuff that's in that electrical box. A few years back, I received a ticket in Ann Arbor for parking, and it was a $3 ticket if I paid it right away. So I drove right over to City Hall, parked, went in, paid the ticket, came back out, found I had another ticket on my car, went back in, paid that ticket, finally got out of there. But one of the things that in the parking conference that we went to is that a lot of people utilize a low-fee parking paid right away as a substitute for paying for paid parking. We have free parking, so that's really not an issue at this point in time until we get to that point of having to pay for parking. And the last thing I want to recommend, and I strongly recommend this, is that at the conference and with a number of other consultants that I've talked to in the past year, having a parking consultant come and look at your community for parking and trying to resolve some of the issues, I think is a very worthwhile and something that we should really look into as we go forward. And I think the sooner the better. I recognize what 2016 is going to be, but we need somebody to come in and take a look at our situation.
Thank you, Art. Appreciate your leadership. Any other citizen comments, please?
Mayor Morrow and City Commission people. My name is Patricia Meyer, and I run an agency called Laws, Labor Advocate Worker Solutions. I worked in the city of Saline for the last 2.5 years and came at the request of several employees and situations in a plant called Faurecia. My secretary and one of our board members is here tonight, and to not take up much of your time, we brought you information that we've did in books in Washington, D.C., and I'm at first been commissioned by the government to come to the Workforce Committee, and the saline plant is at the top of that. I'm here tonight to alert you about the critical situation in the plant. Many employees have contacted our agency, hundreds of them actually, and said that there are water on the floors, oil, dirty bathrooms, break rooms, and ants all over. Some are required to work large areas of press areas with no lights on their tugs. Unreasonable working demands are also being made of the halfway people working on weekends in demand of time. Many people have been ripped of their money, and that would say to go to the company, perhaps Faurecia. But the main issue was the people put on a very large campaign recently to go to their union factory under the UAW direction. Our organization has spent thousands of hours and dollars to get these workers okay in the city. They put down a contract last week because of the terrible conditions. One of the suggestions from the Workforce Committee of the United States, I'm up in Washington usually once a month, and I live in the city of West Olive, Michigan. Some of the members said they have been not represented. They pay dues, and they're asking for dues back. We did do some of the other work in the plant situations that is affected by saline. I've never seen such gross things, and I think that one of the situations that came when people came to our city the other day, they explained that one was from a different country. She'd worked in sweatshops that were better than the saline plant. You could ask me why I came tonight, because I'm really passionate about what we do for the workforce in the United States. I'm a true American. And I also know that the National Labor Relations Board has worked with me, not from the state of Michigan, but from Washington. I've also worked with OSHA, who failed to show up last week because of one failed signature. And it might have helped our host city. I worked with your police force before, with people picketing to make it to the actual public. And so when I worked with the Workforce Committee, I promised them in a week when I get up there that I would at least have come to the city that I've known through the workforce and ask you to take some look at it. A suggestion I would give through my 20 years of working with laborers, we have a free agency. It's known as Laws, Labor Advocate Worker Solutions. I worked with retirees and their families for 20 years. I've written several books, of which I've put some inserts for you this evening. A suggestion I would make to maybe the City Commission, and I've heard much about your board, would be that you would, after reading the information we provide you with, and then I provide Washington, D.C., that I present it to the city. One of the congressional people said, does the city of Saline, your office, know that? And I wasn't sure. So there is a packet. There's a lot of information. I would only ask one thing, that before I leave next week, if you have any questions or any suggestions, I will take them up there and comment to us or make any calls that you can. The information is very thorough to you. And I know about sports and coaching and that, and I've heard many good things about Saline. Some of our doctors live in this area. So I would appreciate you looking at it and appreciate your attention for these workers, and some of them accompanied me tonight. And I hope that you will listen very, very attentively. Thank you very much.
Is there a packet? Are those
There's
individual
packets for each one of you.
Okay.
There is.
We appreciate your time this evening, and
And if someone can get back to my secretary by next week, I'd appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank
I know
you.
Jim.
Any additional public comments this evening?
Hi, I'm Sue Bishop. I've been a resident of Saline forever. My parents have lived here for almost 50 years. They live over on the Wallace Drive, where the construction in North Harris is going right now. A few weeks ago, you were talking about the sidewalks. I'm not sure which sidewalks are you guys concentrating on. Are you concentrating on completely the whole city limits or just certain ones? About 3 weeks ago, my 81-year-old mother took the backyard neighbor's little dog that got loose. She was taking it back to the owner's house, and she tripped and fell on the sidewalk and smashed her face. My dad was in the garage working, and the neighbors are calling. I mean, first thing he knew, it was Saline, emergencies and everything. He heard the sirens, and then the neighbor was coming. He says, your wife just took a tumble on the crack on the sidewalk. So, and when I even walk my dog to go visit my parents, the sidewalks there on Harris, on Nichols, I think it's Nichols that comes right into Harris, they are just bad. You're talking about the trees. That's exactly what's causing those sidewalks. Those trees are old, the roots are coming out. I mean, if you're not watching, they are really, really bad. And my mom doesn't even want to go for a walk anymore. So I just wanted to make sure that you're concentrating on all the sidewalks in the city. Appreciate it, thank you.
Any other citizen comments? Well, let me just say to the last comment, and first of all, we appreciate all the comments that were made this evening, but yes, the initiative that we approved tonight would be addressing the entire city sidewalk inventory and dealing with those vertical separations, which account for about 90% of the defects. So it would rectify about 90% of the problems. But more importantly, I regret what happened to your mother. You please accept my apologies, and I hope she's doing better. Anything else this evening? No, then I would seek a motion to adjourn. Please note our upcoming meetings, but I would seek a motion to adjourn at 10:01 p.m. Moved by Councilmember Gearboss, seconded by, was that Councilmember Rhodes? Okay. To adjourn at 10:01 p.m. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Ayes have it. This meeting is adjourned.